Hey, everybody. Sotek's just a little bit behind. He'll be here shortly. So until then, you've got me, which I know is not a great substitute, but hey, it's what we've got. So welcome to a special Lorebeards episode where Sotek and I are going to talk about something that's really interesting to me, the War of the Beard, or the War of Vengeance. It's quite possibly one of the most significant events in the entire history of the old world. So get ready, guys. Strap in. It's going to be a lot of fun. Can you guys hear me okay? This is a brand new microphone. So, and there's Ryan.
Hello. There we go.
Hey.
How we doing? Hello. Oh, it's so cold. It's so cold. I'm tired of being cold. It just won't stop.
So I'm on a brand new microphone today. I was just double checking that everybody can hear me okay.
Sounds great.
Awesome. And I was telling him we're here for the War of the Beard, which is possibly one of the most significant conflicts in the entire history of the old world.
Yeah, I genuinely think it is. It's kind of one of those pivotal moments of if someone wanted to point to an incident that simultaneously gave the world its best chance of seeing the rise of what would, in my opinion, be a necessary event for chaos to be defeated, while simultaneously being the kneecap event to let chaos resurge back to the world. It was both of those. And it's so tragic. It's a sad story.
It's very sad. It's very indeed. It's really exciting to do this with you, Sotek, because I know you're big into the lore of the setting, and this is possibly one of my favorite things to discuss. So I'm just vibrating over here. I'm like, Rrr.
Yeah, and it's good to be back too. This ice storms and Texas never mix well, but it was so weird on Sunday. We just had we had flickering power. It wasn't like the power went out. It was like it would stutter, which was enough to, if you're on a PC, a stutter is all it takes to just slap you across the face and shut everything down. But fortunately, things have all settled. Schools and all that stuff are still shut down, and there's still a 2.5 inch thick ice sheet everywhere outside. But how are things on your end? How's life over there?
Oh, not bad. It's actually nice and sunny out. It's 52 balmy degrees.
Couldn't be me.
We had a snowstorm this week, obviously, like everybody did, but ours was over quickly and it mostly melted. So weird for Colorado, but there you go.
Yeah, ours is just now starting to melt and fade away a little bit. I think they're thinking by sometime tomorrow it should be pretty much gone or calmed down. You should be able to drive safely at least.
Great.
But hopefully everyone out there is staying safe and warm wherever you may happen to be in the world, because goodness knows this storm just hit so many different places at once, all at the same time. But
I know somebody who's really good at keeping warm.
Oh, who's that?
Malekith.
Yeah. Being cold does not appear to be a problem that he suffers from amongst the list of things that he does. Yeah, and Malekith or Malarian is kind of the perfect branching point for getting into everything we're going to get into. Ross, do you want to give us a little bit of kind of like a intro of ways to get into setting us up for the War of Vengeance, while I send out just on some quick socials that we're live here?
Yeah, absolutely. So because Andy says you guys don't do this nearly enough, if you're not listening, if you're listening to us for the first time and you're like, who is this guy? I am not the normal co-host. The normal co-host is Andy Law. He is currently out at the moment dealing with some family stuff. So it is me, Ross Watson, joining the group for today. And I am a game designer and author. I've been involved in quite a bit of stuff for Warhammer 40K. I've done a little bit of things for Warhammer Fantasy as well. If you've ever messed around with the 3rd edition of the role-playing game, or Warhammer Invasion card game. I wrote a bunch of stuff for that. So that's who I am. And you probably already know who Sotek is, but I'll let him introduce himself when he's ready. Meanwhile, intro for the War of the Beard. Ooh.
Okay, yeah,
go ahead.
Clearly a small task.
So what happens when the two preeminent civilizations of the time go to war? Well, it's not pretty. And the reasons behind it are vast, and there are many, many theories as to exactly who pulled the strings in order for these two forces to conflict, but conflict they did. And without the War of the Beard, frankly, you just don't have a lot of the old world. And I mean, we're going to get into the winners and losers, but I can tell you the main winner of the War of the Beard is the humans, the human tribes of the old world, because the War of the Beard cleared out a whole bunch of space for them to thrive and grow without being in the shadow of the elves or the dwarves, which were, very, very prominent at the time. And we'll get into it, but basically, without the War of the Beard, we wouldn't have Altdorf, we wouldn't have Kislev, we wouldn't have a whole bunch of stuff, because those were elven cities that were razed to the ground during this conflict.
Yeah, it is kind of in the sense of so many forests or places where destruction leads to creation. This is definitely one of those scenarios where you have a bunch of immortal races that if they don't clear the way, then humanity in the old world wasn't ever realistically going to have a chance to sprout. It would have been a bunch of new trees in the undergrowth of some great forest where all the big old trees are just eating up all the sunlight, choking everyone else out.
Yeah, I don't. So Tech, how many years prior to the current date did this happen?
I want to say, I'll double check, but off the top of my head, I want to say the War of Vengeance is 4,000 years.
Yeah, you may hear we have different names for this conflict. There's a certain group that calls it the War of Vengeance. So Tech, which group is that?
The most accurate one, obviously. The dwarfs use the more official sounding term.
Right. Whereas the high elves call it the War of the Beard, and that is the name that I have enjoyed the most, so that's why I use it the most. But you will find out why it's called the War of the Beard. There is a very specific inciting incident that occurs that is all related to this. But before we jump into that, I mean, how much background? I don't know how you guys normally do background.
No, I think that's suitable. So one of the things that's important to kind of be thinking about when you're dealing with the War of the Beard, as we're getting into this, is that the world is a very different place. In many ways, the Warhammer world was at overall its most peaceful when the War of the Beard is about to kick off. Ultimately, chaos globally has been pushed back and has suffered immensely from its defeat at the hands of pretty much all the world's races, but the elves like to claim the most credit during the Great Cataclysm. And the dwarves and the elves, one of the reasons that this war will end up being such a big deal is because they were so close as allies. Of that, the elves had come over to the old world as they were expanding their colonies all around the world, and they had met with the dwarfs, who there were little, they'd had some small encounters with them during the Cataclysm. It wasn't the very first time they had met the dwarves, but it was the first time since chaos had been banished, and the first time in many hundreds of years. And the two of them had worked together to basically push chaos so far into the north that there were many among the dwarves and among the elves who believed that chaos was defeated forever.
Yeah,
it wasn't true, but many of them believed it.
The dwarves and the elves had a very strong alliance at the time. They had, this is back when the old world was called Elthin Arvin by the high elves, and at this time, this is post-Sundering, post-Grudge of Drong, is where we're at in the timeline of the old world. And in this alliance, the dwarfs were given their unmatched craftsmanship, their engineering prowess, military resilience. That's what they contributed to the alliance, where the high elves were contributing their magical expertise, their naval supremacy, their dragon riding. They had cooperated even in building fortifications. Dwarf engineers from Carrick Vlag and Carrick Kazarak constructed the formidable walls of the city known as Athol Toralion, as just one example. Which this would be a place that was sieged no less than 13 times during the War of the Beard.
It would be the big one,
because and it was ironic because the dwarves are sieging their own fortifications.
Nothing worse than when you have to take down something you've built very, very well. As I'm sure there's anyone that's worked on a house ever, what probably relates to. But so that's kind of the general gist of what we're going to be tackling in today. But why don't we go ahead and start doing super chats and stuff, and then we'll get through that, and we'll get into kind of what the events leading up to the war were, and we'll go from there.
Sounds great.
All right, so we got Grim Isaac here saying the Warhammer fantasyfying monsters thread now has Nagarothi mole men. You know, it's probably something that we might need to do. Now I'm kind of thinking about it, is there might be kind of a fun point of maybe doing some kind of stream maybe like once a month or something, where we kind of go through and check in on like what all the different communities have been up to. That might be fun, because some of y'all, as I kind of am looking around here, some of y'all have been very busy. Some parts of the Lorebeards forums have been super busy creating all sorts of fun ideas and fan theories and all sorts of other crazy stuff.
Yeah, our community of fans is called Lore Seekers. If you want to join them, I think one of our guys can put a link to the Discord in the chat. But we have a very active Discord, and a lot of these guys are extremely creative. We've done a couple of Let's Build episodes on the 40K channel. We built a Space Marine chapter. We built a Chaos Warband. We're going to build some more stuff in the future. And every time I've been astonished with the collaborative creativity that the Lore Seekers exhibit. So yeah, big ups to our community. You guys are great.
And so one of the things, what this is in reference to, is there's a thread where people, we did an episode on it a while back last year, of basically going through, people were able to submit different kinds of monsters from across our world's mythology and history that haven't made it into Warhammer Fantasy yet. And me and Andy basically went through and talked about how they could be interpreted, or maybe they're like how we could work on adding them and stuff. And it was really fun, and people have kept basically adding on to that.
I'm going to channel my inner Andy Law for just a second and say, Sotek, you should probably introduce yourself for anyone who's joining us.
That's true. That's very true. So for anyone that this might be your first time, or you just want to hear it again because it just never gets old. Hi, I'm Loremaster of Sotek, or Ryan, and I am a streamer and YouTuber that does a lot of stuff involving Warhammer Fantasy, particularly. But I also do quite a bit involving Age of Sigmar. In fact, after this stream, probably like an hour-ish after this stream ends, I'm going to be playing the finale game from the first Age of Sigmar League that we've done on the Lorebeards Discord, where I'm going to be playing against Hawk Godley, who is our head mod, because me and him both did really, really well. And so we're going to be playing the finale game to see basically who came out on top. It's going to be my Nighthaunt versus his Corn Bloodbound, I think, if memory serves. So if that sounds interesting to you, then check in around like hour and a half after the stream ends, and you'll see an announcement. But it'll just be like a fun little bonus stream over on the Loremaster of Sotek channel for anyone that wants to tune into that. But Nagarothi Molemen sounds great. I would love for the Dark Elves to have foundation problems because of Molemen. That sounds delightful. That makes having a Black Arc even more important, because they can't burrow up beneath it. WPKM, how advanced was dwarf technology during the war? Okay, so this kind of ties into two different things, which the first is that there is a rather infamous issue with Games Workshop when it comes to their lore writing, where because they primarily care about moving their plastic minis, which are very, very pretty and very expensive, but very nice quality, genuinely the best there are. This has led to some kind of eyebrow raising moments, especially we're seeing this a lot with the old world, where you'll see periods that are hundreds of years apart, but everyone's wielding the exact same technology, because those are the only minis that are available to sell. And they're just like, yep, nope, it's always been that way. All the exact same tech has been there for hundreds of years. Don't worry about it. Don't think about it. And we're moving on. Obviously, when we're trying to approach things from a lore standpoint, that doesn't quite scratch the same itch. Now, the War of Vengeance sort of dodges this issue of that. If you read like the Black Library series or check out the various snippets about it that are included in the Army books, because it was so long ago, it often does get referred to using different forms of tech. So, like when you read many of the dwarf accounts, most of the dwarfs during the War of the Beard don't use black powder. Black powder did exist, but it was much, much, much more rare. And some authors have it where it just didn't exist at all. But most have it where like dwarf gunpowder did exist, but a lot of the dwarf tech you're familiar with now didn't. So like gyrocopters and gyrobombers were not a thing. The dwarves did not have any air power. They did attempt to make some air power, which we'll talk about a little later in the stream. But it had a rather cataclysmic result, we'll say. But for the most part, the dwarf technology was significantly lesser. They were relying much more heavily on ancient weapons that they had used against chaos. So a lot of runic weaponry. There were a lot of anvils of doom that were unleashed during the War of Vengeance, especially in the later ages. And there were the biggest thing was there was just a lot more dwarfs. There was a lot more dwarfs.
Yeah, this takes place before the Time of Woes, which is where a lot of the dwarven holds get destroyed.
Yeah, this is rather extra sadly. This is the last great war of the Dawi, when the Dawi are able to unleash their full, unbridled might against an enemy, which in perfect dwarven fashion used to be one of their best friends. So
that is very dwarfy.
Yeah.
Kazakit, ha!
Yep. Getting gleeful, hot take. I prefer dwarfs generally, but Kalidor II is overhated, while Snorri Halfhand is just unknown. Kalidor's anger is much more understandable when you remember Elven cities have been burned. So this is one of the things that I like a lot. So for those that don't know, the War of Vengeance was always a bit of it was something that was often talked about, but we weren't given tons and tons of details throughout the Army books and like the big red books and stuff throughout Warhammer Fantasy's history. And then we got a full trilogy that detailed the War of Vengeance from Black Library. And the War of Vengeance trilogy, personally, this is just a personal opinion, I genuinely believe is one of the best, if not the best, Black Library trilogies we got for Warhammer Fantasy as a setting. Because
bold statement. That's a bold statement.
It is a bold statement. Because it did such a good job of taking the lore that already existed and keeping it, but just enhancing it, fleshing it out with details, and not making a mess of what we already had, but just taking it to the next step. And just so many details were added in and around all of the different conflicts. And one of the things that was done is that if you go back and look at a lot of the Army books that have a very zoomed out, very, usually you get like maybe a page for the War of Vengeance. Most of them focused very heavily on the idea that Kalidor II, the infamous arrogant son of Kalidor I, who was not, by most metrics, a very good Phoenix King, was just an asshole. Like, he was just the biggest dick on the face of the earth. And because he was such a massive jerk, it was really easy for events to be manipulated so that he basically kickstarted the war. The Black Library books added significantly more nuance into it by making it where Kalidor II, although he is still a massive prick, like he's still a huge antagonist to pretty much everybody in the novels, even the other elves. Like, he's not a good guy. There is a lot more setup to the inciting incident, which we'll get into in a little bit, that causes the war to really kick off, in that Snorri Halfhand, who is the son of the king at the time, Gotrek Starbreaker.
High Kings, Gotrek.
Yeah, High Kings. Yeah. Now, Snorri is not Halfhand yet. He will become Halfhand later. But Prince Snorri does not like elves. He really doesn't.
Well, my understanding is that he was well known as a hothead.
Yeah. Oh, yes. He was very, very hot-headed, and he was aching for glory. Snorri didn't really get to live and build the legacy he wanted for himself during the war against chaos, because much of it was in its closing stages. And he desperately wanted a greater conflict. And he also saw the elves as being just an inferior people. And there were elements we'll get into that were fanning the flames of what he desired. And he was manipulated into, when an opportunity presents itself via some dark elf shenanigans, he grabs it with both hands, and it makes things so much worse than they could have been.
I'm going to say this. I'm a high elf stan. Okay. Anybody who knows me knows I love the high elves. And I will say, in my opinion, having researched deeply for this particular episode, Kalidor II is an unworthy Phoenix King. This guy, I do not know. I do not know how he passed through Anarian's flame, because holy moly, every decision he makes in this time frame is just the worst possible choice.
Yeah, he is the only Phoenix King we ever got due to nepotism. And oh boy, oh boy, did it come back to bite them real bad.
Now, his father is Kalidor Dragon Tamer, the first Kalidor, the one that.
So his dad is Kalidor the First, not Kalidor Dragon Tamer. Kalidor the First is, it was Emmerich who takes on the name Kalidor in reference to Kalidor Dragon Tamer.
Okay.
Kalidor the First was the Phoenix King during the Elf Civil War, the Sundering.
Sundering, yeah.
Yeah, and he was great. He was an awesome king.
Right.
He did not want to be king. It's just that when Malekith murdered a bunch of other princes, he was kind of the only realistic option left, and everyone was like, "Emmerich, please save us." He was like, "All right, I guess." And he was a good king, but he died, unfortunately, quite suddenly when Malekith got his revenge, and he died at sea. But Kalidor the First, everybody loved him. He was a great king. He was a very well-beloved king, but his son, unfortunately, was just
the worst.
Yeah.
And I mean, Malekith, yeah. I mean, maybe Malekith might have been worse, but I don't know.
Yeah. There's one of the best vibe checks to understand how bad Kalidor II was is that Kalidor II is a Kalidorian prince. He is the son of Kalidor I, and Kalidor I was one of the mightiest dragon riders in Ulthuan's history. Incredibly skilled warrior. The dragons loved him. He was beloved of drakes. Kalidor II had such bad vibes that not a single dragon ever allowed him to ride them. The dragons never bonded with him because he was that bad.
and for a Kalidorian, that's particularly disgraceful. That's like a whoa, what's wrong with you, man?
Yeah. It was like a really awkward aspect. It was a very awkward thing between him and his father, of that his father tried very hard to raise him to be good, but wasn't able to be there a lot because he is the Phoenix King, and he also, is out there trying to deal with Malekith and chase down what is left of Malekith's hordes into Nagaroth. And ultimately, there's a scene, I want to say it's in the Sundering trilogy, where you actually get to see young Kalidor II being addressed by his father and trying to help him understand the dragon song and be able to awaken a dragon that will bond with him. and it's kind of painful because you can tell his son so badly wants to be him, but he's just not. And there's something kind of fundamentally wrong with him from like an arrogance perspective. And it's rough. It's rough. To blam, almost I would not be able to use a freebie this month. Well, I'm glad you can, and good to see you. Thank you for the month of membership. Happy to catch you live. So for this very important, very unique occasion, I need to ask a question, not waste this 225 character question. Holy, thank you, to blam. Appreciate it.
That's funny. Nice.
Yeah. Zero Daimu. Some elves are still alive from the War of Vengeance. Any dwarfs? No. The oldest dwarf is Crag the Grim, and he's pretty damn old. Like Crag's I want to say Crag is like, I can't remember if he's 1,500 years old or 2,500 years old. Crag the Grim is ancient by dwarf standards, but let's see. Oh yeah, so Crag's in the ballpark of about 17. Probably he's getting close-ish to 2,000 years old. But he's a bit below 2,000. He's around like 1,800. So, but he's the oldest dwarf that is known in the world. So yeah, the dwarves, Crag would have had to live twice his lifetime to have been present for the War of Vengeance.
Yeah, that sounds right to me. I can't imagine a dwarf living quite that long. So
now that would be a ornery. That would be a dwarf that other dwarfs would not want to be around.
that's just Grandpa. Nobody listens to him anymore.
Yeah, he would probably be deeply unpleasant. To Blab, so this time a true question. Dear bearded fellows, what is your favorite reason as to why the brave Dawi are absolutely superior to the Elgi? Well, it's a paid question, so obviously I have to answer it, and not because I may or may not agree with it. If I do, I'll never tell. I would say for me personally, I think an aspect of the dwarfs that I deeply appreciate over the elves is that, and there's good reason for this, as we've talked about on different Lorebeard shows, but I very much enjoy that the dwarfs actually advance as a species. They're constantly developing new technology. They're constantly pushing the envelope. They're trying new things. They are doing their best to continually adapt to an ever-changing world, whereas the elves are much more static. The elves are sort of a timeless people that, because they rely so heavily on magic, which magic in and of itself is a timeless force. You'll notice that the elves never develop technology more advanced than that currently used to make their ships and their war machines and their weapons, which is the exact same tech they were using 6,000-7,000 years ago, which is something that the human in me goes, well, that's ridiculous. That's silly. But it makes sense for the elves. But that is something that I think the dwarves definitely have the better handle on. What about you, Russ?
I was going to say it was going to be a cultural issue. I admire the Dawi's resilience and their ability to endure and advance even through some of the most horrific events to occur. I mean, the high elves have put up with a bunch of crap, but the dwarves have put up with that much crap times 2 or times 3 and still survive. So there's a level of determination and just grit that they have that I think is probably exceeds that of the elves. I think your answer though was very good, and I do definitely agree that the dwarves seem to adapt. I mean, sometimes dragged kicking and screaming into adapting, but they do adapt. Whereas the high elves generally are just I think to this day high elves look at black powder and say that crude, clumsy contraption.
It's so loud. It smells so bad.
Yeah, what warrior
blow up on you? Why would anyone use this? Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, they can't. They either refuse to or just can't see the future. Which, as a high elf guy, that bothers me a little bit, but it's accurate.
I mean, to be fair, if I could do with a bow what a high elf could do, I probably also would look at a gun and be like, that look, it's like that meme from Invincible of like, look what they need to mimic a fraction of our power.
Exactly. Yeah. Think, Mark, think.
Gideon, you talked about how the Norse dwarves and the Dawis are unique cultures, but there are Karuks even further east in the mountains of Morn. You think they might be a fourth dwarf culture? Yes. If the dwarfs of the mountains of Morns were ever to get properly examined, which they haven't been, to be very, very clear, they would definitely be less unique. They went east to the mountains of Morn and established themselves much more recently in most storylines than the Norscan dwarfs and the dwarfs of Zorn Uzkul did, and they appeared to have kept in contact better with the Karazankor than the other two cultures did. So culturally, there probably would have been significantly less drift due to the fact that they maintained contact and that they appear to have been set up significantly later in the timeline. But we know so little about them that it's actually considered a bit of a debate whether or not they actually do exist. Because like if you look at maps, the only maps we have of the Mountains of Morn, which are always from the Ogre Kingdom's perspective, the only dwarf holds and details are all ruined. They're all dwarf holds that have been cracked open by the ogres, and the ogres have eaten and killed everyone inside. And so if there are any holds that are successful within the Mountains of Morn, they are hidden holds that we literally don't know about. So it's a bit of a toss-up. Now, the dwarf lore always likes to say that there are definitely 100% for realsies dwarf Karuks that are still active and functioning because they still are trading and sending messengers and talking to the Karazankor. But we don't know them. We don't know what they're like. We don't know where they are. We don't know their names. So
Dawi cryptids.
Yeah, they are. Yeah, they are indeed dwarf cryptids. It's one of those things that who knows? Maybe the old world will add some stuff there. That'd be super fun. I'm not anticipating ogres for the old world anytime super soon, but if they do go over there, it'd be really lovely to see some of those dwarf holds restored and maybe get some info about like what those people are like. Because they would definitely be different. The Mountains of Morn are a very different prospect. They're much more wild, magical, and nasty than the World's Edge Mountains. The Mountains of Morn are dangerous. I mean, they're prehistoric landmines, basically. Matiosaurus, what's up with Elven power scaling? I mean, a Dreadspear unit is nothing amazing in any of the games, but Felix gets easily outmatched by some random Druki. Okay, so Matteo, this is one of those things where at the end of the day, when you're playing a tabletop game or a video game or anything else, it has to be balanced and it has to be fair. It has to feel good to play. And GW also wants you to buy minis. So a realistic encounter from the lore standpoint is that a singular elf is going to be absurdly more skilled and dangerous than almost any human. They are much faster than us. In some stories, they're stronger than us. And they're capable of, having hundreds, if not thousands of years of training at a bunch of different things and live in just as dangerous of a world as regular humans. And they only get more and more dangerous as they get older, while we get slower and weaker as we get older.
Fair to say, Felix is not a normal person either. The deeds that Felix has achieved makes him a hero of legend at the bare minimum.
Yeah, Felix is pretty top tier for humans. He's not the greatest warrior that you'll find in the Empire, but he's pretty damn skilled. And in the tabletop game, because they want you to at least have a decent number of plastic toys that you're buying, they still want you to be fielding armies that feel like you have a good number of models on the table. Even though elf models are significantly more expensive points-wise, you still have a good number of them on the table in comparison to your enemy. Realistically, if you're dealing with like the actual lore setting, elven armies would be a fraction of the size of a human army. In many cases.
The game mechanics also mean, for feel-good reasons, that a hero needs to be able to take on a unit and not just instantly die.
Yeah, it would be kind of rough if like you're playing Empire and your elf opponent shows up and he has like, to your 60 models on the table, he is like 12. And it takes like everything you have just to bring down one of those 12 guys. Actually, a really good example of this is in the Mordheim game. So in Mordheim, City of the Damned, the game,
the Shadow Warriors.
Yeah. You'd build a warband of guys, and you could have like 12. You had like 10 to 12 guys in a warband or whatever it was, and you'd have like a big guy. But one of the warbands that was added through the magazines was the Elven Shadow Warrior band, which was a high elf group you could run.
Broken.
And, yeah,
absurdly broken.
You got like 3 of them. Like you got like 3 guys, or it was something obscenely tiny. And they were the most bullshit warband that everyone hated. Hated them. Everybody hated them. If you showed up with Shadow Warriors, everyone thought you were an asshole, and nobody wanted to play with you.
You'd win all your games and lose all your friends.
Yeah, and they were lore accurate elves. Where they just curb stomped everybody else. Like you had to be playing one of the other like very elite groups, but the biggest thing was that their archery would just kill you. Like they could snipe you from across the table, and you'd be hiding behind cover. They're like, whatever, I'm still gonna hit on like a 2-up, and because they had like ballistic skill 8 or 7 or some other stupid shit. So you could give them like a -3 and they're still gonna hit you. And
heroes start with a 5, if I remember right.
Yeah, it was absolutely absurd. But that was a good example of if you were to translate it realistically. Even in Total War Warhammer, when you throw like a unit of swordsmen into a unit of spearmen, you kind of see them being like, oh, they're like kind of evenly matched. Whereas no, in the lore, if you had just like basic Empire swordsmen, even well-trained soldiers, well-armored soldiers going up against a group of elves, the elves would almost assuredly not lose a single person. Because they're just that scary. But humans have guns. And guns can often be the great equalizer for a reason of like, yeah, you've been training for thousands of years, but bam, dodge this. And there's just not that many elves. When elves commit to a fight, every loss is a tragedy. Whereas humans, even though we are among them, losing a certain amount of humans in a fight is kind of like, oh, that's unfortunate, but we've got more. We've always got more. Skylar Martin, Sotek, at what point will you earn cat ears? One day. I haven't reached that point in my character development yet. Bavafoot, filling up my early voting app. How's things? Things are okay. It's cold. Though today's not nearly as bad as it has been. Today, like the sun is actually out. At least it was earlier. It's gone now. But the ice has started to melt, so that's nice. Yeah. Ross, things going well on your end?
Yeah, not too bad. It's actually a really nice day out. It's about, like I said, 52 degrees here in Denver. To go back to your black powder firepower thing for a second too. I mean, some people call that American magic.
Yeah, I cast bullet. Yeah,
I cast bullets as Gideon Cleveland. Yeah, I may be out of mana, but I'm not out of bullets.
Yeah, Zero, you're not wrong. There are elves that could dodge bullets. Realistically,
a version of Veltharion.
Yeah, I mean, think of it. This is what I'll say. Think of it this way. Realistically, if a human is well trained enough, if we're all sitting there watching like a John Wick movie or whatever, most of us do genuinely believe that if a human is well trained enough, they could feasibly dodge a bullet in the sense that they see a gun aiming at them with the trigger being pulled, and they can just in time get themselves out of the way of that bullet being fired and crossing the distance to them. And
they study a style of combat where they are statistically in the least likely position to be hit, a la Equilibrium.
Yeah, for elves, an elf, I would argue, at point blank range would have a reasonable chance of being able to dodge or at least parry a firearm. I mean, Swordmasters of Hoth literally have a rule with their big old great swords where they can parry bullets. They can, which would probably be the most terrifying thing to witness if you shoot at an elf and he just goes boop and just knocks the bullet away from him. And you're like, well, that's all I had. I guess I'll just die now.
They have the Deadpool ability to cut bullets out of the air.
Yeah, like just think of all like the goofiest anime tropes you've ever seen of how various anime protagonists deal with being shot at with guns. Elves have some equivalent of that. Whereas, like, you know, if you're dealing with a dwarf and he's wearing Gromwell, he's just gonna walk through the bullets and not give a damn because they're not gonna hurt him. Let's see. WPNK, how far did the Kata's Encore reach before and after the war?
Up to the time of woes.
Yeah, so that one's actually a little bit tricky. So the biggest thing about the Kata's Encore is that the dwarfs in many ways walked out of the war in a much better position than the elves did until the time of woes, which happened almost immediately afterwards.
Yes.
But the biggest, so none of the dwarf holds fell. The dwarves did not lose a single hold. What they did lose was that there was kind of a subculture of their people known as the Skaranawi, and the Skaranawi were the hill dwarfs. And so they lived kind of more out in the southern and eastern reaches of what we now know as the Empire. So like the not super forested areas where they built holds that were much more open air or were more set into like large hill structures that were far more exposed. And when the dragons entered the war, the dragons incinerated the hill peoples. They went in there and the dragons could very easily like rip open and just breathe fire and everybody dies. And that's what happened. So the Kata's Encore itself didn't, as we currently understand it, barely changed. But it did have significantly more control and extensions up into what we now think of human lands that were all exterminated and wiped out. And for the dwarfs, they never had the chance to really consider if they wanted to refound those locations because of the time of woes. But secondly, for many of the mountain dwarfs, they looked at the hill dwarfs like they were kind of crazy. They were like, why would you ever not want to live beneath a mountain? Like, look how exposed and all the stuff they are. And when they all got killed by dragons, it was kind of one of those like, oh, I told you so. I told you this would happen type of moments for the dwarfs. So it was what the dwarfs kind of lost was a part of their culture as opposed to like lots of territory. So
Hey.
yeah, Richard Ross, as your favorite lawyer, what do you think of my most recent lawyering of today? Another ping delivered to you. Your answer shall pay for a beer. I have no idea what this is in reference to.
So he and I are in a debate, you might say, over a character in Warhammer 40K known as Conrad Kurz. And Ricardo's position is that Kurz is somewhat misunderstood.
Man, where have I heard that argument before?
And sympathetic. My argument is that he's irredeemable. But I think we're starting to come to a closer understanding of the character, a more shared. I still think we're kind of on opposite ends of the spectrum, but we're coming closer together, which is cool. I will look at that later, Ricardo, for sure. I want to double check and make sure I've read the most recent stuff because I did read some of it yesterday. But yeah, keep it up. I think we're having a great conversation about Conrad, and we're hopefully we'll have an episode about him on the 40K side soon, where we can get into it in full detail.
I love that. That sounds like he's pulling the thing you always see, like where the serial killers have like romantic like women that like send in letters and stuff. They're like, he's misunderstood. It's not his fault.
Yeah, the prison pen pal.
Yeah, Ricardo's just that for Kurz. Thank you, Ricardo, Appreciate it. Necroplayer, with how horrible and bloody this conflict got, it is so hard for a normal person to be biased between the noble, honorable, beautiful high elves and the brutish, smelly savages and small dwarves. Yep. Very, very difficult to be biased indeed.
Well, I think, as we go through this event, it's probably going to become clear that both sides had their issues. I would say neither side had its hands completely clean.
Yeah, it was, in my opinion, it's a well-written war in that at the end of it, the only thing you can do is go, well, that was really sad and both sides suck. Which is what it should be. Like that's
legit.
Yeah.
Legit.
That's the best way to put it. Otto von Dawi, first donation. Well, thank you so much. Basically, first stream. We appreciate you joining us. What perfect timing. I just got the Grudge of Throng campaign book supplement yesterday. Awesome.
Yeah.
Man,
Grudge of Throng is kind of like a prelude or a sneak preview, if you will, of a lot of things that go on during the War of the Beard. For example, Grudge of Throng involves a lot of dark elf shenanigans as a false flag operation, which is exactly what happens in War of the Beard. It's also one of the last times pre-War of the Beard where the elves and dwarves work together super closely. So, if I'm not mistaken, in the Grudge of Throng, there's a section where the elf character, I can't remember his name, starts, it's like Einar. Anyway, the elf character in that one like defends a dwarven brewery against attack. So yeah.
Back when things were better. Yeah, the Grudge of Throng is it's a really nice setup story, and it's a fun little, I guess you could call it a little campaign. It's a campaign supplement. Man, that's 1996. Holy moly. But yeah, it's a good time.
30 years old today.
Yeah, it's got a lot of really, really pretty of the older art in it. But awesome. I hope you're having a good time with it. Serpanza just finished the Orion trilogy. My favorite part was when the elves died horribly. Good time. So basically the entirety of all three books. Yeah.
Well, to be clear, those are Azrai.
Different elves. I mean, all dead elf. The only good elf is a dead elf. Some dwarfs might say, but
those elky,
knife ear is terrible. It's a good trilogy. They did a lot of really, really fun things with that. I look forward to. We'll have to do a Orion episode at some point. WPKM, good to see you guys. By the way, hope you're both doing well. Yeah, I'd say we're doing okay. Thank you. I appreciate that. Getting Gleeful, it seems the Aesir basically had control of all the non-mountain regions of the old world prior to the war. Was the old world their largest colony? Yes, by far, significantly. The old world colony was absolutely titanic compared to any of the other ones. And the main reason for that is honestly because of the dwarfs. When the elves arrived in the old world, or when they arrived all over the world, so Lustria, Nagaroth, what we think of now as the old world with like Bretonnia and the Empire and Talea and Estalia, Kislev, Norska, down into the Southlands, over onto the Lost Isles, over up into End and Cathay. Most places where the elves went, they encountered significant resistance from either just the natural elements or the environment or the forces that already lived there. So, they would end up they would establish contact with Grand Cathay. Well, the Cathayans are already there in a very, very powerful force. Nippon, the people already there in a powerful force. And you already have the Land of 1,000 Gods and whatever's going on there, which hopefully we'll learn more about in the old world. And there's a force already established. The jungles of the Southlands and Lustria are exceedingly dangerous and difficult to go into. Nagaroth is a very cold, frigid land that doesn't seem to offer much of consequence, so it's a difficult land to go into. The Badlands is just teeming with greenskins. Like all these different places in the world are very, very dangerous for all sorts of different reasons. But when they arrive in the old world, first of all, this was where the most significant of many of their forces were, because it's where Malekith the Great ends up, and he lives there for quite a few years. And Malekith is one of the leading forces of purging the Beastmen and the Famir and a lot of the Chaos forces from the old world. But they meet friends where they meet the dwarfs. And when they run into the dwarves and they establish an alliance, this is one of the only lanes they end up in where they find true, genuine friends who fight side by side with them back to back against legions of demons and worshippers of chaos from the north. And they're able to just keep pushing them back and establish a very, very strong series of lands with a lot of healthy exposed coastline that they're in very nice overall climates that aren't horribly dissimilar to those of Ulthuan. So it was just kind of the perfect place for them to have a very, very large set of colonies for lots of different reasons.
Yeah, if I may, there's some settlements that people might be aware of. There's Cor Vaneth, which would later become Altdorf after the War of the Beard. There's Athel Numiel, which would eventually become Kislev. And they had a settlement called Cor Immermore, which was basically the Lorelorn Forest. Just to name a few places that the High Elves had significant settlements in the Old World during this period.
Yeah, pretty much almost every damn city in Bretonnia is built on elf ruins.
Yeah, that too. Yeah.
Much of Talea and Estalia are built on elf ruins. The Empire, it's mostly around Marienburg, what we now think of as the Westerland and the River Reich. There's a lot of elf ruins, but some of those go all the way up to like areas near Mindenheim and deeper into the various forests, especially if you read some of the older lore. Like there's a duology of books called the Gilead series about an elf character named Gilead.
I love those books.
Yeah, they're older. I will warn anyone that reads them. I actually had a friend. She has been getting very, very heavily into elf lore, and she's like, "Oh, I'm about to read Gilead." I'm like, "Just so you know, like it's a little different." And she came back. She's like, "I really enjoyed it, but there were some really fucking weird parts of these books." It's like,
they read kind of like a Moorcock novel almost.
Yeah. But one of the big things about Gilead and all that is that Gilead himself is basically like an old elven colonialist. So he's from one of the fallen elven colonies that is not talked about often. And a good part of his books is about him wandering around to a bunch of the ruins of old elven cities that are not like recorded on any maps. But yeah. Let's see. Itachi Hero. Hey, Sotek and Ross. Got to catch live, so I wanted to share my love for all y'all do. Please give my love to Andy. I saw he suffered a loss recently. Yes, thank you so much. I really appreciate that. So first of all, thank you very much for the support. Second of all, yes. And I will go ahead and say here that although the details have not been finalized yet, at some point, probably in the next week or two, we will over on Lorebeards have some kind of thing available for if people want to send a form of like condolences or support to the laws, because Andy did just very recently suffer the loss of his father, which is our heart goes out to him. We miss him a lot, and we hope they're doing okay. And I know they're dealing with all the things you unfortunately have to deal with when a close family member passes away. So please do keep them in your thoughts. Getting gleeful, your description of the story reminds me of Shiro from Godzilla -1, the young crew member who is like, man, I wish I got to fight in World War II. The rest of the crew obviously do not agree.
Great movie, first of all. And Shiro and Snorri have like, that may be like the only thing they have in common, because Snorri is like straight up an accelerationist and a terrorist if you look at it from the high elf perspective. So I don't know. But great movie, and Shiro's attitude does reflect some of Snorri's goals.
Yeah, and in Snorri's defense, there were other elements at play, which I think we can actually take a moment here to pause and address here. I'll actually grab this one real quick. Nils Andre, thank you, sir. Good. Happy to be back and doing stuff. So. Talking about the setup to the War of Vengeance a bit. So in the original army books and like times when the War of Beer would be addressed, especially if you were going through like 4th, 5th, 6th edition books, it was always a very black and white story of Malekith, being the supreme conniving evil schemer that he was over in Nagaroth, tells a group of dark elves, hey, go dress up as high elves and attack a bunch of dwarf caravans, kill dwarfs, steal some stuff, and
assassinate a rune lord.
Yeah, really piss them off. And the dark elves go, okay, so they go and they use like high elf equipment, high elf arrows, and all this stuff, and they kill some dwarves. They kill a venerable rune lord. They loot some things. It's a whole bad situation. And the dwarfs obviously find the scenes of these crimes, and they go, all the evidence points to elves. So High King Gotrek Starbreaker sends a group of delegates over to Ulthuan who go, hey man, what the hell? We're gonna need reparations for this. And Color II says, haha, no, and also has the messengers shaved of their beards.
Well, it's more than that though, too, right? Because at the time, the ambassador, which was what's the ambassador's name? I can't remember his name. Anyway, the ambassador was not fully aware of events that had occurred between the time he was dispatched and by the time he arrived at Calidor's court. And one of the things that had happened before he got to the court was Snorri went off and attacked a whole bunch of high elves.
Right.
And so, he jumped the gun.
Yeah, we'll get to that. So that's details that are added in the Black Library trilogy, which come a little later. For the kind of the original story that Games Workshop gave us, it was just kind of like Malekith do thing, dwarf get mad and accuse high elf Phoenix King go, no, you, shaves their beards, kicks them out, and leads to this big war. Which was suitable for like the zoomed out Warhammer perspective that we tend to see. But kind of like with like the Horus Heresy, because like you think about how simple the Horus Heresy was when it was first introduced.
Right. It was just a paragraph, yeah.
Yeah, versus what it is now. Like Ross said, they added the first book, especially, spends a lot of time setting up the conflict.
Forek Grimbach is the name of the ambassador. Forek Grimbach.
So like Ross said, in the books, there is quite a bit more well, to get to that part, we start focusing very much on how the dwarfs in many ways are restless after what is seen as the great defeat of chaos. So like the last great army that they're aware of in the old world of beastmen and human worshippers of chaos and demons, and there was even like I think a greater demon of Zinch and a greater demon of Nurgle at this big battle are defeated by Malekith and Snorri Whitebeard, so who was the first High King of the dwarfs,
also known as the White Dwarf.
Yes. He'll eventually get so pissed that he comes back from the dead. But they chase chaos off, and life's great. Things are good, and we get to the age of Gotrek Starbreaker, which is a good while later. And because you have to keep in mind during Snorri Whitebeard's era, he was best friends with Malekith, who was the great hero of the elves. And then the elves go through the whole sundering, and all that shit goes down. And the dwarfs. One of the things that's key about the Dawi is that the Dawi are not aware of the sundering. The elves do not tell them because the elves are deeply embarrassed about it. And
so to a dwarf's eyes, it's all elves. There's no dark elves, no Azrai.
There's no elves. Yeah, the idea of different types of elves is ridiculous. Because to the dwarves, the idea of there being different kinds of dwarves is ridiculous. The dwarves don't really know that much. They're aware of the chaos dwarfs, but many dwarfs basically just are like, well, they don't count. To the dwarfs, the idea of there being a kinslaying civil war is literally impossible. From a dwarf mindset, that is something that literally cannot happen. It's not just unlikely, it is impossible. And so the elves just don't tell them. They don't tell them about it. They don't want to admit this deeply tragic, embarrassing thing, a series of events that happened. And the colonies, for the most part, stay out of it. And this leads up to that when events are bubbling up for the War of Vengeance, for the most part, things are good between the colonies and the dwarfs, but there are several figures on both sides of the aisle that are deeply speciesist. They are deeply they are supremacists of their own species. Snorri is a very good example of this, where Snorri does not like things that are elven. He does not like things that are extremely different. In many ways, he is a very traditional dwarf. He is a dwarf that appreciates dwarf things and dwarf tastes and dwarf ideologies, and thinks that compromising in order to live in harmony with the elves is weakness, not strength.
Well, it's probably important to point out too that opportunities for glory were thin on the ground after the vanquishing of chaos and all that. Snorri was looking ahead. He was the son of the High King. He's looking ahead at his own legacy, and he's like, I'm not going to be able to, what am I going to do? How am I going to be remembered if there's no great deeds left to accomplish? And I should say, the event that I just was talking about with Snorri, he sacked Corvineth, which was later Altdorf. He sacked it, but he did it against his father's wishes. Gotrek Starbreaker was not like, go attack elves. Snorri was like, my dad told me to be cool, but I'm just going to do this anyway because it will establish my name a little bit,
Yeah, and in Snorri's defense, two big things is that there are many dwarfs who are speaking to him privately or whispering because they don't want the High King to hear them, who think that the elves are bad. They think that the elves are lesser, that the elves should be pushed out of the old world, that this is dwarf territory, not theirs, and they are itching for a war with the elves because there's profit in war. There is glory in war.
Are you talking about Hatarkin, the ever-changing?
We're about to get to him. And the other factor is that there is a very strange dwarf that arrives from the south right before the War of Vengeance is about to kick off. And
Drogar Zardum. What a great name.
Yeah, so Drogar Zardum is a Dawi that shows up that hits it off really quickly with Snorri. And his story, so I'm going to say massive spoilers for the War of Vengeance, but you should know that because you clicked on the damn stream. But if you want to read the trilogy and not have a Titanic fucking spoiler, leave now. But once again, I don't know why you clicked here if you didn't want spoilers. But Drogar claims to be the last surviving dwarf from the original Dawi hold of Karak Zorn, like the great founding hold of the dwarf peoples.
Legendary lost hold.
Yeah, he claims to be because supposedly, according to the War of Vengeance trilogy, which is actually a very interesting aspect that is never really addressed again outside of it, Karak Zorn was known to be a hold that they had decent contact with from time to time, and he basically shows up and says, nope, they're all dead. Everybody's dead. Just me. I'm the only survivor. We were attacked by a legion of giant lizard creatures that walked like men, and they're all dead now. And what is revealed much later in the story is that Drogar is not actually a dwarf. Drogar is a lord of change. He is a greater demon of Zinch that has assumed the form of a dwarf, and basically he is the little demon on Snorri's shoulder.
Is that a demon prince, not a greater demon?
I want to say he's a greater demon because I think he's the Lord of Change, the same Lord of Change that in the intro it makes like a whole prophecy to Malekith as they're fighting.
Oh, okay.
About how his alliance with Snorri is going to come to an end.
It would be entirely in keeping with Games Workshop to introduce a character as one, and then they're later.
Yeah, it could be a demon prince. I don't. Yeah, I'd have to reread the scene where he reveals himself. I would have sworn he was a Lord of Change, but he might be a demon prince. But they're basically the same from Black Library's perspective. There's not really an interesting difference anyway. But he is a Zinchian force. And
Hatarkin the Ever-Changing is what his his demon name is.
Yeah, and basically what he is doing is he is trying to tear down this alliance, because Chaos recognizes that if the elves and the dwarfs remain united, Chaos is fucked, just flat out. Just they are completely boned. If Chaos cannot figure out a way to break up these two, it will never be able to accomplish its goal of global destruction, what have you. Because if you think about it, if the War of Vengeance had not happened, and then the Age of Woe had gone off, one, the dwarfs would have had significantly more resources, significantly more soldiers. They would have been in a much better position to immediately go about defending themselves and protecting what they can. But the biggest thing is the elves would have been there to help. Imagine if when the earthquakes come and holds are split open and legions of greenskins, orcs and goblins and skaven are pouring in from all directions, if the dwarves had been able to call for help and the elves would have come, that the elves, you would have had dragons fighting their way to hold off legions of greenskin hordes crossing overland. There would have been elves going down into the deeps to fight back to back with the dwarves through the endless tunnels and hordes of the skaven. The Age of Woe would have been, so many holds would not have fallen if the dominoes had not been set up to split these two up before it went off. But in any event, so this greater demon, or this demon, we'll say, is one of, not the, but one of the many pieces that causes the War of Vengeance to be as bad as it is. Where he is very much inflaming things from the dwarven side. Meanwhile, on the elven side, unfortunately, they did not need a demonic presence to really, really push them over the edge, because they had Keller the Second instead. And like Ross said, so they do, the story does follow the old notes about how a group of dark elves comes in, and they're actually a much nastier group than the original one from like the singular paragraph writings, where it's like a dark elf sorceress and some other really nasty guys, and they kill a bunch of dwarves. They kill a rune lord, which is really, really bad, because you're killing a living piece of cultural history. Killing a rune lord is not as simple as like, oh, you killed an old dwarf. You are killing someone who possesses knowledge that is now going to be lost forever. Because rune lords, unfortunately, are notorious for not sharing their secrets until they're literally on death's door, sometimes not even then, because they don't believe they have found an acolyte that's worthy of knowing the secrets they possess.
You got to prove yourself to earn that secret.
Yeah, the dwarves actually have a serious problem about not like passing down information correctly. But in any event, so this leads to the dwarves being absolutely fucking furious, to the point that Snorri, who is eager to fight, is able to rally enough support in spite of the High King's orders. Because the High King says, no, we're not going to attack. We're not doing any of this shit. We're going to send, like, the elves have been our friends for centuries. This is very out of character for them. This is very strange. I will send some advisors, some ambassadors over to Ulthuan who will deal with this. We will have Weregild. The elves will pay us for this insult, and we will figure out what the fuck is going on. But we are not going to attack them until we're just not. And there were many thanes and many kings of the other holds who wanted to immediately attack, who were like, nope, this is war. This is an act of aggression. This is a betrayal most vile. We should immediately go to war. We should immediately go to war. And High King Godric Starbreaker was very forward thinking. Even by dwarf High King standards, he was very similar to like Thorgrim Grudgebearer in that aspect. He
short. Ugh.
Yeah. He knew that the price would be one that the Karazhan Corps could ill afford to pay. And he ultimately said no. But as Ross told us earlier, Snorri says, yeah, fuck my dad, not gonna listen to that, and goes off and sacks an elven city. And unfortunately for the dwarf ambassadors, elf news travels much faster than dwarf by boat. And
so Calidor knew this when Forek shows up as the ambassador. Calidor is like, so hey, about this city your people's destroyed. And the ambassador's like, you're lying. We would never do that. It just inflames everything. It escalates the situation considerably.
Yeah, there is, I think, literally nothing worse that you could do than put someone or two groups as arrogant as a dwarf and an elf in a room together and give them both very different pieces of information and then let them hash it out. Because they're going to accuse the other of lying, and both of them are not going to take it well. And things get incensed enough that not only does Calidor II banish the ambassadors, like have them thrown out and sent back to the Kazancore, but as the biggest insult possible, he has their beards forcibly shaved.
All of them.
Yeah, which for Calidor, I think it would be very accurate to say, did not realize the true significance of what he had just done. Because he was a dick, but Calidor had no respect for the dwarfs. Calidor despised them. Calidor II, he literally just saw them as these like filthy mud monkeys that lived in caves, and some of his people liked trading with them, but like clearly everything they do is inferior to the elves. They look wrong, they smell wrong, they're filthy, they're dirty. There's nothing admirable about them. And that act from him was meant to be extremely rude, but Calidor did not recognize them as people enough to realize the cultural crime he was committing. Now, his brother, Morellian, is it Morellian? What's his brother's name? The Master of Dragons.
Sorry, I don't know.
I got it. Master of Dragons. Imladric.
Yeah. I was wondering if you were talking, I wondered if you were talking about Imladric, but I was like, I wasn't sure.
Yeah, Imladric. So his Prince Imladric, who is his brother, his cousin, I think it's his brother, but he's
his younger brother.
Prince Imladric likes the dwarfs. But Prince Imladric, unlike the Phoenix King, has been living in the colonies. Like, Prince Imladric has been in the colonies. He's been fighting alongside the dwarves. He's visited dwarf holds. He's spent a lot of time with the dwarven peoples. And Prince Imladric's one of his best friends is a dwarf. Who
Morgrim Blackhands, right?
Yes, who also happens to be Story's best friend.
Blackbeard. Morgrim Blackbeard.
Yeah, Morgrim Blackbeard. Yeah. And Prince Imladric knows immediately what this means. Like, he is the one that sees what Calidor has done and goes, this is bad. Like, this is like, what you have done is beyond the pale of the worst thing imaginable. And when the dwarf ambassadors go home and the dwarves learn what has been done, it is ugly.
This would be a good time to point out, I think the novels mentioned that there was violence when the High Elves seized the diplomats to shave their beards. That a fight basically broke out. Calidor himself killed one of the dwarfs, and like there were casualties on both sides. This was not a peaceful seize them and shave their beards. There were deaths involved before they were sent away.
Yeah. And so the dwarfs go home, and when they report to the High King, he knows there's no stopping what is coming. What Calidor has done is so beyond imagination, is like an
unforgivable.
Yeah, is such an insult directly aimed at the core of who the Dawi are, that he knows he cannot stop this. Now, what's interesting about Gotrek Starbreaker is that Gotrek does not have the heart. He doesn't want this. So Gotrek doesn't actually get involved in the war himself for a long time. He stays out of it. He allows the dwarves to fight the elves. He allows the war to go forward. but he stays out of the war for a good number of years, though we'll get to him later. And
we should talk about the Steelbeards.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
The Steelbeards, this is a special military regiment that was formed from the very dwarves whose beards have been shaven. And so they were put together with these masks that had a steel beard on it to represent their lost honor. And they wielded rune axes specifically made for killing elves. And Grimbach, before he took the Slayer Oath, he led them into battle. They were vengeance incarnate.
Yeah, so the war kicks off, and the War of Vengeance very quickly devolves because once again, you have to keep in mind that for the colonial elves, this is not a fight they want. They don't want to fight this war. For them, it's literally this weird thing of like, oh, did you hear some dwarfs were attacked by elves? And they're like, that's weird. And so the colonial elves are like investigating what happened. So the colonial elves are like looking into it, and they find out relatively quickly that dark elves are behind it, and are able to go to like Imladric and go to the Phoenix King and be like, hey, this was a setup. Like, we have been set up. But they can't just tell the dwarfs because now they're going to try, because they realize that it's going to look like they're going to the dwarfs and be like, hey, it wasn't us. It was this other group of elves on this other continent who we had a bit of a breakup with. By the way, they're led by Malekith, Malekith the Great, who was the best friend of the first High King, and who we didn't even want to tell you about, had betrayed us, because if we did, we were a little worried that you would side with him instead of us because you like him more than us. Him. Like, he set this up, and it totally wasn't us, and we didn't tell you about any of this, and we're totally not making this up just so you won't attack us.
Bro. Trust us,
bro. Trust us, bro. Trust us. They realize how bad that looks, so they don't try to do that. They go, you know what? Let's not do that just yet. Let's try and, like, you know what? Let's fight the dwarfs a little bit. We'll do a show of force, and we'll beat them. And once the dwarfs are beaten and they calm down a little bit, like, we'll beat them in a few fights. They'll chill out, and once they chill out, then we can have like terms and peace talks.
Now, that wasn't Keldor II. That was just sort of cultural arrogance on behalf of the High Elves that they could. Yeah. Well, sure, of course we can beat the Dowie. Of course we can. We're the asser.
Yeah, not a big deal. Easy. Yeah. Okay, so we'll leave off there of the war about to actually kick off, and let's get more caught up here with super chat stuff. Farstank, if we're still doing what ifs, which we are, of course, at some point later this year, what if Sigmar lost to Nagash? That would definitely have changed a number of things. If Nagash had reclaimed the crown of sorcery at the Battle of the River Reich, that would definitely be one of those crossroads that we could explore. Super Orlock, thank you so much for the super chat. We appreciate that. Getting Gleeful. Okay, follow up. Regardless of whether the Mountains of Morn dwarfs are still alive, how did they establish multiple holds past the Dawi Zar? I'm aware the answer is you tell me, but I'm venting confusion. Okay, so actually it's not that crazy. What it ultimately is that when the dwarfs went up into Zorn Uskul and they were looking at the Darklands, the reason the dwarfs did not want to settle there is that there were many among them, particularly among the Rune Lords, who looked at Zorn Uskul and they saw that it was very rich in mineral resources and things like oil and all this other stuff that they could imagine uses for. But they could tell there was something fundamentally wrong with the land itself. That the corruption of chaos laid especially strong in these lands, and that there was a taint to it that was not worth the risk. And that all of the reasonable Dawi said, nope, this is not it. So they either kept going east, which those dwarves would end up becoming over many long years. They would eventually find successful, safe paths all the way over to the Mountains of Morn, where they would say, this land, although it is wild and there are like lots of big nasty beasties and all this other stuff, this land is ultimately wholesome. This land, we can burrow beneath these mountains. We can make holds here that will be successful, that will be safe. They were wrong in the second part, but they did not realize what was going to come later. And there were some that went north, and these would end up becoming the Norscan dwarfs. The problem with Zorn School wasn't how far away it was. The problem with what was with the very land itself was wrong. There was something there, which for it, not only the predations of chaos, but you could argue that there were some among them who may have in some way, shape, or form sensed the presence of Hashut. Because it mentions that only the greediest of the Dawi clans stayed and built up the first hold over there.
Hashut is essentially the Arkenstone.
Yeah, he's a metaphysical Arkenstone. Scallywagu, I've been reading the 40k Cyphus Kane novels because of the stream a month or two ago. I find Cyphus to be quite similar to Felix, an expert fighter who doesn't give himself quite enough credit.
Yeah, that's true. Kaivsky, we did an episode on Kaivsky over on Lorebeards 40k. He's a fantastic character. Arguably, possibly an actual good guy in 40k, although there are no good guys in 40k. He comes pretty close. And his book series is really excellent and has a lot of really fun Easter eggs and stuff in it. So yeah, glad you enjoyed the stream on that guy. And you're right. Him and Felix have some things in common, including the fact they don't give themselves enough credit as swordsmen.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, duel between Kane and Felix would be really interesting, actually.
Yeah, that actually would. Gideon Gleeful, fastest average reflexes, elf or vampire. Well, if you're talking about average, you're talking about the full spectrum of elves. So I would say the average vampire is going to be faster. It will depend. Well, actually...
Well, are you counting elf babies? Because they bring that bell curve down.
Oh, yeah. Okay, talking full warriors. No, you know what? No. Now that I think about it, I think on average, an elf would actually be faster. I think the average Lamian might be faster than an elf. But I would say the average elf is going to still be faster than a vampire. But the vampires are way stronger and way tougher. Like way tougher and stronger physically than any elf. Watchdog. How hard is it in universe to tell a Druki apart from an Azrai to an Asur from an Uranai? So if you are a human, you would almost assuredly not be able to tell the difference if they're all naked, we'll say, so they're not wearing any clothing or cultural signifiers, it would be borderline impossible for you to tell the difference.
Indistinguishable. Yeah, I agree with that.
Like the biggest thing might be that the dark elf is slightly more pale. But from a human perspective, they would all look basically the exact same. It'd be like taking a person out of rural America who has never left the country, who's never left their town. They've never left their hometown. And their town, let's say, was like just all white people. They're a white kid in a white neighborhood, and they've never left. They've never seen anybody of any other race. And you got them in a room with four people like from four different like Southeast Asian countries that are very, very easily distinguished by people that have actually visited those lands and like known those cultures and people. And you said, do these people look like they're all from the same place or a different place? And he's going to say they all look like they're from the same place. Because elves, not only do they not look very different, but like in general, but you have to keep in mind that elves are very, very good at infiltrating each other's cultures. Like there are high elf spies in Nagaroth. There are dark elf spies in Ulthuan. There are spies of the other elven cultures in the Lara Lord. Athelord's a little trickier because there's the whole magic-y weirdness of the forest power of the wood elves. So it's a little harder to infiltrate, but there are probably spies there as well. And they are able to blend in seamlessly amongst one another. And for most humans and other people, they have a very, very hard time. You just don't see that many elves. Like the vast majority of humans will easily go their entire lives and never see an elf ever. Now, if you live in like, a port, that's a very notable port, like you live in Marienburg or Altdorf or a lot of parts of Bretonia, like, yeah, you're going to see elves. But even then, you're probably not going to see a lot of them because most elves prefer to be rather incognito and for humans not to bother them. But yeah, the vast majority of humans would have a 0% chance of telling the difference between a dark elf, a high elf, etc. 1.21 gigawins. The old world high elf loremaster model is a cross-classed mage/swordmaster, noticeably wearing plate armor and casting a spell. Does Ithelmer not repel the winds like normal metal, or is it an enchantment elves use? So, in the case of dealing with someone like a Loremaster of Hoeth, you are okay. So there are two different answers to this. The first is that having metal impede your wind of magic is something that some wizards suffer from, but not all, as we see with like chaos sorcerers, for instance. There are elves could debatably be seen as one of the groups that are capable of being powerful enough wizards that they are able to use magic quite successfully in spite of any issues that might be caused by interference from their armor. But the most realistic answer is going to be that their armor is basically at least minorly enchanted. That their armor is designed for mages to wear, which you see a lot like in the tabletop game. Even if you're playing with like the Empire or Bretonia or blah, 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 a lot of armies will have like a piece of magic armor that can be worn by wizards. It'll say something like, oh, this can be worn and you can still cast magic, even though you're wearing this piece of armor. So the most likely option is that the Swordmasters of Hoeth are wielding specialized armor that is designed for them by the White Tower of Hoeth, which makes a lot of sense. Like, if there was anywhere in Ulthuan that was going to have armor designed for wizards, it's going to be the White Tower. So, yeah. WPK, were all the elf cities abandoned or did Dawi take any? They were abandoned. Because the TLDR, they were abandoned because the dwarfs, when they won the war, while they did win it, as we'll get into a little bit here with Ross, the war took a lot from both sides, and the dwarfs were so fucking tired that they were like, okay, we won.
I'm gonna take a nap now. Yeah, I'm gonna take a nap now.
Yeah, and they went home, and then the earth immediately and they had other problems to deal with. Giddy and Gleeful, Skaven, Greenskins, and Elves all have pointy ears. Has any dwarf made that insult/comparison? If not, I'm surprised. No, they definitely have. There are definitely Dawi out there who have made that. There are definitely extremely speciesist dwarfs that have made comparisons between that goblins and elves have similar ear types.
However, when they say knife ear, you know what they're talking about.
Yes, yeah. That insult's only reserved for the biggest of traders. How did the Aenir survive? So the way that what you think of as the Wood Elves survived is they stayed in their fucking forests. We will actually get to the Elves of Athel Loren because they actually formed, the Wood Elves formed during the War of Vengeance. Or actually, well, they formed kind of during it and then immediately afterwards.
Some might say they were waiting for an excuse.
Yeah, some might say, yeah. But the Aenir, so for the most part, the Aenir are credited with that they did their best to stay out of it. They were one of the groups that when orders came down from Caldor II that the colonies were to take up arms and fight the dwarfs, there were several groups that said, no, fuck you, I'm not doing that. I'm not dying for your bullshit. Because, I mean, think about how weird it would be as an elven colonist, right? Of that, you don't know anything that's going on. You've heard rumors that the dwarves were attacked, like a dwarf caravan was attacked supposedly by elves. And then all of a sudden, a messenger shows up one day and says, so the king killed an ambassador and deeply embarrassed the others, which all of us here know dwarfs. He shaved them and sent them back, and the High King has declared war, and Caldor II has demanded we go and basically like fight the dwarfs because he pissed them off. And a lot of the colonists were like, no, how about I don't? Now, most of them followed orders because their cities become under attack. The dwarfs were the initial aggressors in the stage we're about to enter. But a lot of the colonists had no interest in fighting the dwarfs. This was not their war. And a lot of them still died because of it, which is really, really fucking tragic. Because any opportunity for them to tell the dwarves that wasn't us, the dwarves don't understand that as a concept. For the dwarfs, your people are a monolith. Because the dwarfs see themselves as a monolith, which is ironically not correct. Because by this point, they had already lost contact with the Norskin dwarfs, who were not talking to them. So the dwarves already themselves were not a monolith, but they were like, that doesn't count.
Wait, they were hypocrites? What?
Yeah, dwarf and hypocrites couldn't be. Impossible.
Shocked.
But the big thing that the Aeonir were credited with, so there are different versions of the story. So like if you read the Warhammer Fantasy roleplay game, 4th edition, it credits the survival of the Aeonir of the War of Vengeance to a group known as the Grey Lords. And the Grey Lords are, let's say, a rather infamous group of very, very, very powerful elven sorcerers who unleashed an incredibly powerful ritual that caused this big magical incident that get the dwarves to leave them the fuck alone. Now, I believe in the roleplay game, the spell they used basically like resurrected all of the dead spirits.
Yeah, you're talking about the blinding death. Darlahan's plague is what you're talking about.
Yeah. So they unleashed this like weird magical super plague weird thing that like scared the dwarves off, basically.
The Grey Lords, they're disgraced elven mages. They had returned to the forest to study artifacts of the old ones. That's their whole deal. And the Grey Lords, they summoned a spirit host. Now, I mean, when you say summoned a spirit host, and you're talking about elves on the mainland in the old world, now you can, I don't know, you tell me, Sotek, but it sounds like they were connecting with some of the things that you would find later on in Athaloran.
I think so. If I recall correctly, which I'd have to go back and read I think it's Volumes of the Empire. I can't remember if that details from the Forest. That might be from Forest of Hate, actually.
Yeah, that's what I'm referencing. Is Forest of Hate.
Yeah, Forest of Hate. I can't remember if the spirit host is a group of forest spirits or if it's a group of like literal spirits.
Well, I mean, it could be either or. I was kind of speculating that maybe it had something to do with or was connected to in some way, but that's probably beside the point. The important thing that happened here, though, is that Cor Imamor, which is where the dwarf reserves were encamped, gets swamped by these spirits, and it's so devastating, so unnatural. This is where Darlahan gets the term "the blinding death," and it's recorded in the Dwarf Book of Grudges as one of the greatest atrocities ever committed by elves. It's a big deal, and chaos corruption did eventually come from that site. Because Darlahan, I think he was doing a lot of dark experiments.
He did some weird shit. Yeah, I know Andy is very not fond of that particular storyline. Okay. But I mean, I think it works. It's just not the direction I know he wanted them to go with Lorelorn. But anyway, that's how they survive. We're here about the War of Vengeance. WMK, how were the old world human tribes affected by the war? There weren't many at this time. The area was mostly dominated by dwarves and elves. There were some very, very early humans, but they were further up into the northeastern parts of the old world. And humanity was very much like not a super respected group. Now, what's genuinely very interesting is by this point, there really should have been some lore notes about how Nehakara sees what goes down, because Nehakara is like a thing by this point in the storyline. Like they're there, they're doing shit. So Nehakara would have been a human empire that would have witnessed the War of Vengeance from a not super nearby, but reasonably nearby location. Because the war almost exclusively takes place up in like Talea, Estalia, and the Empire, as we understand it today. The war did not
up to Kislev.
Yeah, and up at Kislev. The war did not stretch like the southern holds of like Kadak Azgal and Kadak Azul and all of them, they were almost entirely left out of the war. Like they marched to it and they were offering supplies and they were sending soldiers and all this other stuff, but like the elves didn't mess with them at all because they never got that far. But yeah. Effects on so that's what we were just talking about, is that for most of the world, in a perfect world, from a lore perspective, there would be notes from Grand Cathay and Nehekara and other places that witnessed what was going on, because they would have been trade partners with both the elves and the dwarfs, and they would have known something was up. They would have known something weird was going down. Now, they might not have been by any means completely aware, because a lot of them were so far away and they've got their own problems that they're dealing with. But it's hard to imagine them not at least hearing about it, because it would have been, because especially with how ugly the war was. But you could, I think, make a reasonable argument that both the elves and the dwarfs did not speak about the war very much during it, because they were either afraid of like outside forces joining their enemy, or they found the whole thing about the war particularly embarrassing and just didn't want to talk about it. Those are potential options, but unfortunately we don't really have many, if any, notes about like what the other groups thought about what was going on. Why didn't the fishermen stop the war? Because they only gained to benefit. That's why. Clearly, those fishy assholes had nothing to. Oh my gosh, we have so many super chats. Oh,
well, the fishmen get brought up a lot over on Lorebeards 40K too. You're not.
Yeah, because they're everywhere. They're a multiversal threat. What is space if not the black ocean of the abyss? Right? It's full of fishmen. Jonathan King, I arrived just in time to be told the dwarf was shaved. Vengeance! They will need a whole new chapter of the Book of Grudges. There was definitely several chapters added via elves.
Yeah, the Great Book of Grudges has got a major section devoted to this whole thing.
Yeah, poor High King Gotrek Starbreaker was probably suffering from anemia from the amount of blood he was having to use to write. Because for those that don't know, to write the Great Book of Grudges, it has to be written in the High King's blood. That's the only ink that's allowed into it. Man was probably having to take iron supplements. Stephen Lucas, like the Total War Warhammer tariff meme, Swordmaster can missile reflect vampire cannonballs like a baseball. Not technically true, but sure, why not? It's funny. Biofoot, dwarfs don't see interspecies divisions. Look at Chaos Dwarfs, Imperial Dwarfs, Crab Dwarfs, Slayer. What are Crab Dwarfs? Airship Dwarfs. Huh, weird, isn't it? Yeah, listen, dwarves are true conservatives, right? They're being complete hypocrites is like very core to their being.
Rules for thee, not for me.
Yep. Yeti. Okay, out of my meeting. Azar did nothing wrong. Dwarves are too stubborn and the war is on them. Sigmar is not a god. Hotshot be praised. You know, I think some people were maybe with him for the first part of that.
Listen, again, I'm the high elf stan on this show, and I can tell you, Keldor II, he did a lot of stuff wrong.
Listen, every empire's got its bad egg. Bless you.
Excuse me.
Bless you thrice. Getting gleeful. People might look at the shaving and think it is kind of comical, but it becomes less so if you think about IRL cultural humiliations. Imagine force feeding an ambassador religiously forbidden food. Yeah. Or like, imagine. I mean, just imagine if you were like hanging out at a friend's place. I mean, to many of us, our hair is very much part of our personal identity. But like, if you grew up in a house where like your hair was seen as like a gift from your ancestors, and you are never to shave it, maybe you could do things with it, you could style it up or whatever, and you went over someone's house and like a bully like held you down and used a razor while you're fighting back, so you're being cut constantly. It's not like it's a clean shave. No. Like you're going to have all sorts of bumps and cuts, and you're going to be bloodied and mutilated as they basically scalp you and then send you home.
sheared like an unruly sheep.
Yeah, like imagine how absolutely fucking furious not only you would be, but everyone who cared about you would be. Like for most people, that would be, where does this guy live? I'm going to go beat his ass levels of anger.
I think one of the major inflection points you can look at from War of the Beard is the penalty that Calidor II inflicted on the ambassadors. If he had not been so assholey, if he had just been like, okay, you guys need to get out, and exiled them and didn't shave off their beards, this whole thing would be very, very, very different. But this is why it's called the War of the Beard. This is it. This is the moment.
Yeah. Which I think in and of itself tells a very interesting story that I actually really appreciate Games Workshop for including, is that the elves genuinely use what could best be described as kind of a dickish title for the war.
Absolutely,
like,
yes.
Calling it the War of the Beard makes it sound like a very overreactionary response from the dwarfs. Like it makes it sound like, oh, the war was over a literal beard, which that definitely was one of the biggest inciting incidents, but it wasn't really the core of the thing. And like, if you were a human and you heard the War of the Beard, you'd go, well, that sounds like a stupid war. And the elves would go, yes, it is a stupid war.
That's exactly the kind of name you'd give it if you were a massive dick.
You know? Yeah, but if you were to sit down and listen to all the details, you'd be like, man, y'all are like massive assholes for calling it that. Like, exactly. That war was about so much more than just a beard, but also like that was the biggest cultural insult you did during the entire war. Like, shouldn't you call it literally anything else? And it's why, like, and for the elves, like, it's kind of one of those like niggling, like, to the dwarves, like all these thousands of years later. You know, it's because the elves lose at the end of the day. And for them, like, that war is very, very bitter. Of that, they lost so much over what they saw was like an overblown incident. Whereas for the dwarfs, you know, they're like, how dare they call that the War of the Beard? This is why we'll never forgive an elf.
Well, calling it the War of Vengeance, though, is very culturally appropriate to the Dawi because it's about getting even, right? With the culture of the Dawi is about getting even. And calling it the War of Vengeance perfectly matches what they would see it as. So I think both names are very apt given the civilizations that use it.
Yeah, like could you imagine if like I'm trying, man, I can't even think of like a good example. Like it would be like if someone from World War II had been like, oh yeah, this was the War of the Mustache.
Yeah.
It was the War of the Little Mustache. That's all World War II was. That was the whole thing. And then you go like, why is it called that? And then like they tell you everything that happened, and you go, that doesn't seem like an appropriate name at all.
It's reductive, right? It's absolutely reductive.
Jaunty Scarecrow, wouldn't the Rune Lord sense a disguised demon? Not necessarily. Most Rune Lords cannot sense magic like that. Rune Lords cannot see magic. They cannot perceive it in standard ways. And there are methods of hiding oneself that if you're really, really strong, which this demon was a very, very fucking nasty demon. If you are very good, an incredibly powerful individual, you can wizards can hide themselves from almost literally everything. I mean, not only was this demon hiding itself from dwarves, it was also hiding itself from elves. There were elves around it that did not sense its presence until literally like the day before one of the last big battles. Because the demon wasn't revealed until grotesquely late into the war.
Far too late.
Yeah. I thought Dawi disliked war and prefer building. Not all of them. not all of them. Some, but not all.
Definitely not Snorri.
Yeah. Red Letter Media's Mr. Plinkett, Malekith's behind it all. Thank you, Yeti. I don't know who Mr. Plinkett is or Red.
Oh,
that sounds.
I do, and it's an apt. That's a pretty fun reference there. Well done. I'm actually wearing a shirt that's a reference to another YouTube show. So there you go.
Oh, well, there you go. I'm glad somebody got it. WKM, any colony elf defectors refusing to attack the dwarves? Yes. There were the elves that went to Athel Loren, and many of the elves in the Larlorn refused to fight. They only fought in self-defense. I'll put it that way. They were not willing to be aggressors against the dwarfs. Aaron Streamer, future what if? What if Caldor's brother, Imladric, was Phoenix King instead of Caldor II? That would make for an interesting what if. He probably would have handled things very differently.
The old world would be all elves and all dwarves.
Yeah. Watchdog, did Gotrek learn of Snorri second? Oh yeah.
He found out.
Yeah, Gotrek found out quick, and to say that he was pissed is an understatement. But he was cataclysmically angry. Yeah. Yeah, he loved his son. He dearly loved his son. Some might argue that he loved his son too much, because in some ways you could argue that what Gotrek should have done when he found out Snorri did this is he should have demanded that his son take the Slayer Oath, or handed him over to the elves for basically war crimes. But he doesn't.
It's the John Wick problem, right?
Yeah, like it's his son.
It's his son. What are you gonna do?
Yeah. Gideon Gleeful, once we beat them, they'll calm down. This was largely considered a bad move.
Yeah, Morgan Freeman voice right there.
Yeah.
This was largely considered a bad move.
Bioflood, a dog migration story makes me think of Dwarf Fortress. I hear a lot about that game. I need to play it at some point.
Yeah, me too.
WPK, first, biggest, and finer major battle of the war. So I would argue the first battle of the war was probably Snorri sacking what will later become Altdorf.
Yep.
The biggest battle of the war is also the last one, which is when Gotrek Starbreaker finally takes to the field of battle, and it's the 14th siege. I think
Torlesi, the final.
The 14th siege of Torlesi, where Caldor Dragon Tamer II is, and Gotrek Starbreaker is, and it is a absolutely fucking enormous fight.
Also, Torlesi is a fun little in-joke reference to the Games Workshop designer Alessio Cavatore.
Oh, there you go. I would love to have a site of horror and death and destruction named after me. That's peak Warhammer. I want that so bad. Ricardo, Vampire versus Astartes. My bet is Vampire. Take it to 40K. Probably not a surprising answer for me, though I think I genuinely could back it up, but we might have to do a show on that at some point, because that could probably be like a fun discussion. But I would go Vampire.
You know what? I've got good news for both you and Ricardo. There are Astartes who are vampires.
Yeah, you can always do that.
They're the Blood Angels.
Yeah.
And technically all Space Marines are to some extent vampires, because they can all drink blood and gain information and knowledge through that. There are certain Space Marines certain Astartes that like it a little too much, which is like, that's where we get the Blood Angels from and so forth. But yeah, if you were to put a vampire, I think a vampire against an Astartes, I would generally put my money on the Astartes, just for one simple reason: the Astartes have ranged weapons and the vampires don't.
No. My vampires got magic. All vampires can use magic except for Conrad, but he's a weird outlier. But gotta go vamps. Gotta go vamp. Val Loser. I'd still love to see some story including dwarves that have some Scarnari heritage. They'd likely be very ashamed of it, but I'd just eat it up. I think that could definitely be a thing. It's kind of one of those situations where I think if you were to ask Games Workshop, they have genuinely forgotten that the Hill Dwarfs were a thing, because they were only a thing in that novel. Like outside of the War of Vengeance trilogy, there is never any mention of the Hill Dwarfs. So like their canonicity is a little meh. Getting gleeful. A lot of colonists in the old world refused. How involved were the more far-flung colonies like Tor Elisor? Did they abandon their colonies when Caradhral ordered them? And no. So all of the other colonial areas were completely uninvolved. They had nothing to do with the war. Caldor, one of the important aspects of the war, which we're about to have to zip through, is that Caldor II genuinely and very deeply believed that the war would be over super quick and that the colonies could defend themselves. So he didn't send any help. He didn't send anybody initially. Once it became clear that the dwarfs were not backing down and they were a problem, he started sending more and more stuff back to the colonies, more generals, more troops. He sent the dragons eventually. He sent all sorts of stuff. But it never quite got to the point where he was like calling upon the other colonies around the world, because eventually he went there himself, which we'll talk about in a little bit. Then he comes back and then he goes one more time to like end the war. And when he goes the second time to end it with the full might of Ulthuan behind him, he dies.
Yeah, it's important to remember that any decision Kalidor II makes is the wrong decision.
Yeah, pretty much.
Just imagine yourself in that situation and be like, yeah, he's going to pick the wrong one.
Yeah, and for Caradriel, who is the Phoenix King after Kalidor II, Caradriel does what most would argue was the very sensible thing, which is that Ulthuan, literally as they're reeling from the 14th Battle of Torlesi, like the elves are still there in the old world, Malekith attacks Ulthuan, and basically a surprise assault to try and take the island, or at least take as much of it as he can before the elves come back to fight him. And Caradriel basically orders the old world colonies to abandon everything. Abandon ship, everybody go home because we need all hands on deck.
Recall the colonists to Ulthuan. It's actually there's even a high elf technology in Total War based around this.
Yeah. But when they're talking about the colonists in that aspect, they are only very specifically referring to the old world colonies. They're not referring to the various like station towers that are found elsewhere around the world, like the Tower of the Sun,
Tower of Dawn,
the Tower of Dawn, the Tower of Dust, Tower of the Stars, etc. Yeah. Those ones are military installations. They were not full colonial efforts. So those were left intact and fully garrisoned to the best of their ability, because they had a purpose of like maintaining the elves' dominance of the sea. Battlefoot. Largest battle of the War of Vengeance. Chappelle Roans swinging and belting out Pink Pony Club narrator, and lo, many elf dwarf families were made. That's heresy on like 6 levels.
Wow.
Ricardo, question: how many pages does the Great Book of Grudges have? As many as it needs to have, says Games Workshop. Lots. And there are multiple volumes. There's a bit of a goofiness where like sometimes it'll be referred to like, oh, the Great Book of Grudges is a singular book that has every grudge the dwarves have ever had. There's no book that could fit that. Realistically, it is in volumes.
Really tiny print. It's just
just the tiniest micro print. But it is it's quite likely that there are many different volumes that are often like collated, and that like the one that Thorgrim carries is probably like the Great Book of Grudges of his era. You could imagine that each king might have their own. And they might like transpose certain grudges that are of like particular note to that king. Like, who knows? Maybe that could be like a big thing about when a dwarf becomes high king, is like, as you know, like how a pope has to pick a name. Maybe a high king has to pick which grudges he's going to carry over from other books to his book.
That's actually fascinating. That's a tangent I'd love to explore someday.
Yeah, that would be a fun idea. Watchdog, how much did the orcs, goblins, chaos force, rats, etc. take advantage? After the war, they take big time advantage. During the war, there's not too many notes about it. Like, there are hints about rising forces. There are notes that in, like, if you read the War of Vengeance trilogy, in the first book, Snorri and Morgrim are actually exploring these parts of the deeps beneath like the old world, and they actually, without realizing it, are tracking the Skaven. And there's a whole lot of hints that the Skaven are building up for a potential attack against the dwarfs, because like some dwarfs have been disappearing. There's like weird things going on. And you get the idea that if the War of Vengeance had not ended up distracting them, the dwarfs were, whether they realized it or not, were about to be engaged in a great war against the Skaven. Now, it's worth noting that the Skaven at this point are finishing their Doomsday engine, which the Skaven were literally building this giant, ridiculous weapon in Skaven Blight that they believed, if when they activated it, would like kill everyone in the world or like turn everyone into Skaven or something. It malfunctions and it blows up. But when it blows up, it causes the earthquake that destroys the dwarf empire to be way worse than it would have been, because the initial earthquake is caused by the Slann moving the tectonic plates a little bit, but when they do that, the resulting earthquake causes the Skaven Doomsday weapon to malfunction and blow up because it was built with no safety precautions in mind. And when it blows up, it makes the tectonic plate shift way further than it was supposed to, which makes the earthquakes that happen like so much more cataclysmic.
It's implied that Gotrek Starbreaker was building up his military force before the War of the Beard, and it's my headcanon on that is that he was preparing for dealing with the rise of other factions in the old world, and that's why he had all these
skins out in the Darklands and all this other nonsense.
And that's why he had all these armies ready to rock when things kicked off.
Why are dwarves never reading swords or polearms? Aesthetic. That's the realistic answer.
If I may, it's actually related to models too. When you are sculpting models for Warhammer Fantasy back in the day, they were all rank and flank, so you had to be they had to be able to stack up. Okay. And the dwarfs were easy to do that because they had little axes and little shields, and they could just be locked together in a unit pretty easily. Whereas polearms, if you look at any of the Empire groups, it's a lot more. You got like the front rank are the only ones holding, the ones out, and everybody else has got them holding up. So
yeah, it was cheaper. A lot of it boils down to there's no answer. The easiest thing I could say is from Games Workshop, they never answer this. They literally never address this ever. When you read the actual lore, the Black Library books and stuff, you will find dwarfs that wield swords and polearms. They're not unheard of. In fact, if you go back to, old Imperial dwarfs, especially wielded polearms. The actual minis, they're hideous to look at because they're from 3rd edition, but they literally look like these little balls of metal just holding this big stick. But the headcanon, admittedly, the headcanon that I've always had is that the dwarfs like all of their weapons to function as tools for cultural reasons. So all of their weapons are axes or picks or hammers, like things that can be a tool or a weapon.
Fun fact, Mordheim dwarves can carry spears.
Yeah, there you go. But realistically, there would be dwarfs that have those. So yeah. Getting Gleeful story idea I just had. Elf and dwarf friend who are defectors traveled the world during the War of Vengeance. Yes. Also, if you want something that's kind of similar to this, but is really fucking tragic, there is a dwarf elf book called, oh god, it was in the Dwarf Omnibus. What was it called? It's called hold on.
It's a great idea. I'll take over for while he's searching, but it's a great idea getting Gleeful. I do really like the idea of these two guys wandering around witnessing all the things that are happening and commenting on it as they go to give you those two different viewpoints. Maybe even discussing a lot of the things that we're talking about, but from a more reasonable perspective. So I think that would be a great idea. I'd love to have write it is Gav Thorpe. I think he'd be a great guy to write that because he's good at both elves and dwarves.
Gathorpe and Nick Kime did a lot of really, really good shit. I think it's Oathbreaker or Honor Keeper. It's one of those two books. But it literally has a best friend dwarf and a best friend elf. And it's super fucking sad. Highly recommend. James Hitchens, love how the second most reasonable elf in the setting comes from Caldor of all places. It's time for Lorebeards to show some love to Prince Immeldrick. One day. All right, we're going to pause the super chats for a little bit because we've got to actually get through the war. We've done a lot of setup for the war, but we actually got to get through it. Because we only have an hour. So we talked about a good bit already. Story Whitebeard's assault, which leads to Caldor's whole thing, and the ambassadors get shaved and thrown out and everything. So when the war really kicks off, me and Ross spoke about earlier, a lot of it, the early part was that the elven colonies did not want to fight the dwarfs. So they kind of just didn't. They basically stayed home and prepared for sieges. And the hope was that the dwarfs would march out, the elves would scare them, and the dwarfs would run back to their holds, and then they could sue for peace. That was the hope. That is not what happened. Instead, the dwarfs came out in incredible numbers with very elite armies that had been warring and pushing back the legions of chaos for the last few centuries. And they absolutely obliterate several elven cities.
Which leaves room for the humans to come in and take it later.
Yeah. So they wipe quite a few elven cities off the map, which causes a lot of like refugee crises and stuff. And there's some really fun, like cool lore stories. Like one of my favorite lore tidbits from one of the older army books. I want to say it was the dwarf like 4th or 5th edition book, but there's a little short story in there about one of the opening battles. The elves do what they usually do against like beastmen and goblins and stuff, where they're such good archers that they basically they load a full volley of arrows and they fire all of their arrows all at once. So it's this big wave of arrows, and they specifically aimed it so that it would land right in front of the dwarf's feet. So they don't aim it at the dwarfs, they aim it right in front of them as the dwarves are marching towards them. And the reason they do it is because when they would do it against like beastmen or skaven or anything like that, it would scare them. And a lot of the front ranks would like be thrown into chaos, or they would at least stop or at least retreat. Dwarfs don't give a fuck. They just keep marching. So the elves do it again. And the dwarfs keep marching. And then they start shooting at the dwarfs, and the dwarfs just don't stop. They just keep their shields up and they just keep marching through this arrow rain. That's the moment when the elves realize that A, the dwarfs are not like any opponent they have ever fought, and B, that this is no longer going to be a simple situation.
And when word gets back to Calidor II, he decides, okay, I need to personally lead this enormous fleet from Ulthuan to basically save the colonies. Because a lot of the ones that didn't get destroyed were under siege, like Toralessi, which was sieged, again, 14 times. So there was people to save. There were elves to rescue. And Calidor was, he was righteously angry about the whole situation, and also being a massive dick, was like, I'm going to do this myself and teach these dwarves a lesson.
Yeah. And to Calidor II's credit, the only good title that he has is Calidor the Warrior, because Calidor was many things. But a chump in combat was not one of them. No,
he kicks ass. He can definitely kick ass.
Yeah, Calidor II, something we talked about earlier with him is that he had a lot of personal humiliation about the dragons, about the fact that a dragon never bonded with him, which for a Calidorian prince is kind of a like, ooh. So he rather obsessively attempted to make up for this deficiency by training as hard as elvenly possible until he was quite literally a obscenely skilled warrior. Like, he was a very, very, very good duelist. So after the elves suffer a whole bunch of defeats, Calidor has had enough. Snorri in particular has been leading the dwarfs to win after win after win. And Calidor says, all right, I'm done with this. And he decides to pop over to the old world at the head of a big old army to meet the dwarfs. So they have this big old fight where you get Snorri and the dwarfs versus the Phoenix King himself against leading the elves. And it's this very large fight that boils up to the two of them end up dueling. Snorri Halfhand, which, fun fact, Snorri, the reason he's called Snorri Halfhand is because he's missing two fingers on his left hand, I think. But one of his hands, he's missing two fingers because a Skaven bit off part of his hand very, very early in the saga. But he didn't realize what it was at the time.
And Snorri is actually trying to achieve a prophecy, fulfill a prophecy that one of the Rune Lords had given him, that if he were to slay a Drak, he would become king, which is a kind of a strange way to phrase it, and it fuels a lot of fan theories about this particular prophecy. But this is why Snorri believed, he was like, if I defeat Calidor II, this will this is my chance.
Yeah, this
to
will
become a
cement
legend.
my legacy.
Right.
Yeah. But unfortunately for him, he was not up to the challenge. And Kalidor II cuts down Prince Snorri of the Dawi in battle. Kills him. And it was not a good death.
He didn't just kill him. He desecrates the corpse.
Yeah. He cuts him down in a rather embarrassing fashion. He humiliates the corpse as a very fuck you to the dwarfs, and the dwarves are routed. The dwarves lose this battle badly. And Kalidor basically goes, all right, I've won the war.
That's that.
Dwarves, yeah, it's over. The dwarves will never emotionally recover from this defeat. I'm going back to my palace now. My brother, I leave, like, fucking wrap this shit up. And he pisses off back to Ulthuan. And word gets back to the High King that his son has died. And this causes two big things, which is not only is High King Gotrek Starbreaker beyond incensed, infuriated, aggrieved that not only has his son been killed, but in such a disrespectful and grotesque fashion, but also Snorri's best friend, Morgrim Blackbeard, who is also best friends with Imladric, the Master of Dragons, who is the brother of the Phoenix King, who just got put in charge of the war. Yeah, who is now in charge. He's like basically the head general, while Gotrek organizes some other matters. And so the war jumps to a new height because now the dwarves have basically, while they were starting to slow down a lot of the atrocities the dwarves had been committing, was kind of getting them to be like, the death of Snorri and how he dies reignites that idea for the dwarves to win at any cost. There is no cost too great.
If I may, it's important to point out that Gotrek Starbreaker attempted numerous times to achieve some sort of diplomatic solution.
Yeah.
He sent several envoys to try and work this out diplomatically, but the death of his son kind of elevates a conflict of honor into a blood feud of the highest order. And that is what changes the character and tone of the rest of the war.
Yeah, and especially because when he hears about his son's death and how he died, when he puts that grudge into the Book of Grudges, the only thing that is an acceptable leveling of the grudge for the death of Prince Snorri is the head of the Phoenix King.
Kalidor II must die.
Yeah.
That's the only way.
Yeah, so the war reaches another level. Morgrim takes over of leading the fight against the elves, and the elves, to their credit, also do step up to the second stage, which is that in full effect they unleash the dragons. And the dragons for the dwarfs are horrific. The dragons are an absolute fucking nightmare. They exterminate the hill dwarfs, who had several holds. There were a number of interesting characters among the hill dwarfs, but pretty much all of them are exterminated and wiped out. So like an entire subculture of the Dawi is wiped out. Many armies are incinerated by dragon fire. It's horrible. And the dwarves start immediately trying to figure out, okay, we need a very reliable method to kill dragons at this scale. The dwarves had methods of killing like individual terrors, individual great drakes and emperor dragons. But the old worms of Ulthuan are a very different prospect because they're not just singular creatures. They're moving in formations. They're ridden by elves who are very powerful wizards or very skilled warriors, and they're loaded with magic artifacts, and they're being backed up by armies. So this is like a whole different form of warfare that the dwarves have never seen before, utilizing these dragons. And so the dwarves adapt. This leads to a rather interesting side storyline where the dwarves of Badakvar do invent the first notable flying machines. And the ones they come up with don't actually end up being the gyrocopters, which are invented many centuries later, but instead, basically, you can think of it as an early version of the thunder barges, so like great war balloons. But this is when we meet a dwarf engineer who had actually been working on refining and purifying warpstone to use as a weapon. And to his credit, he succeeded. He did make a form of warp stone that was not causing like mutation or extreme madness or insanity. And it was in such a refined powdered form that he was able to make devastating weaponry with it. And there's a great battle where he basically unleashes his thunder barges in an attempt to unleash these great flying machines equipped with war machines that could shoot the dragons out of the sky and fuck them up and everything. And the thing is that he had tested this powder to make sure it was safe to use. So it was resistant to fire, it was resistant to force, it was resistant to sudden shocks and all this other stuff to make sure it was safe to utilize, as dwarf should be. But he didn't account for something, which is a demon. A very nasty demon we talked about earlier, who has been manipulating affairs from the side. Because there's one force that does react with warpstone in this really refined form, which is the warp fires of Tzeentch. And so when all these great thunder barges go up in the air to beat the dragons, and if they had worked as they were meant to work, and they had roundly defeated the dragons, with the dwarfs keeping these machines, this would have ended the war at this point in the favor of the dwarves. But this demon, this cackling, maniacal Tzeentchian bastard, doesn't want the war to end yet. It's not time for it to end yet. Both sides haven't been bled enough. He needs the war to keep going. So he shows up on one of these ships and he unleashes warp fire just as one of the dragons is like breathing fire and attacking, and makes it look like the dragon fire is what ignites the warp flame, or the warp stone. And so all this warp stone ammunition and powder and everything on all these different airships blows up, and it unleashes an explosion so bad, not only does it destroy all of the airships, but it also, or all but like one of them, but it also kills a good number of the dragons. So both sides are absolutely crippled. And
Dawi Hindenburg.
Yeah, it's literally Dawi Hindenburg. And it was so bad that the dwarves were like, okay, no more flying machines. Not for not for millennia, no more flying machines. And also that dwarf who invented the warpstone powder escapes, and he gets back to Barak Var, where he's like, I don't understand. How could this have happened? I tested this. There's no way this could have happened. And he's in his workshop, and the Tzeentch demon comes in behind him and basically reveals to him what happened, just as it like opens warp fire in its hand, and his workshop blows up in Barak Var, which cripples the entire port of Barak Var. So Barak Var is like taken out of the war because of this. And this also leads to the dwarf saying, we will never use warpstone ever again. Ever again.
There's another turning point that if you're okay with it, I'd like to cover.
Yeah, go ahead.
Grunty Mingle, the Battle of Grunty Mingle. So this is another major turning point in the war, and it's also very tragic. Prince Imladric confronts the dwarf forces that are now under the command of his former best friend, Morgrim Blackbeard. And the two of them get into this major conflict. This is where we get to see like a lot of the differences between the two cultures, the way they fight. The dwarves have technology, the elves have magic, and things are more or less a stalemate until Morgrim and Imladric get into it, because Morgrim is carrying legendary runic armor and wielding an axe with dragon bane runes, and he straight up kills Imladric's dragon, Drukane. So now, forced to fight on foot, Imladric confronts his old friend, and Imladric, of course, being an elven prince, is just extremely skilled. He's knocking Morgrim around like a billiard ball, but he can't get through the armor. And Morgrim, because his axe is still activated by the dragon runes, one blow shears through the armor of the elven prince, and he kills Imladric there on the sands in front of Grunty Mingle. And it symbolizes everything the war had become: friends killing friends, skill negated by circumstance, Pyrrhic victories on at least both sides weaker. Yeah, it was this is a turning point, because again, it's a technical dwarf win but it's a Pyrrhic victory at best because the forces of the elves inflicted massive casualties on the dwarves.
Yeah, one of the things in particular about the duel between Morgrim and Immeldrick is that both of them, Immeldrick and Morgrim, were genuinely shocked when Morgrim one-shots him. Morgrim did not intend to kill him like that. But like Ross said, it was like kind of an accident based on the activated runes because of the whole thing about the dragon. And Morgrim knew he needed to beat his best friend, but deep down he really did not intend on.
He didn't want to kill him. Yeah, it was not intentional.
Yeah, and instead he basically bisects him with a single blow. And it's this horrible moment where for many of the dwarfs, Morgrim becomes known as Morgrim Elgidoom after this. Morgrim the Doom, the Elf Doom. And for most of the dwarves, this title is like the greatest honorific, and for him it is deeply despairing.
Yes, he hates it.
like literally he's being called like Morgrim best friend slayer as far as he's concerned. And things at this point are truly awful, but the death of Immeldrick also signifies the death of any moderate possible hope of a peaceful resolution to the war. Immeldrick's death, the death of the Master of Dragons, unleashes. There is nobody at this point among the elves who has any desire to find a peaceful resolution. At this point, the elves are like, fuck them, kill them all.
Well, you could argue that Calidor II was never going to listen.
Calidor II was never going to listen. But there were forces that were listening to Immeldrick.
And Immeldrick was the one guy who would have. Immeldrick was the one guy. He was the last hope of the elves to find a peaceful solution, and him getting cut down removed that from the equation.
Yeah, so things continue to escalate. I can't remember exactly where the battle takes place, but there's this whole saga about that there's one particular dwarf lord who is infamous for the horrific war crimes that he unleashes. Like the tactics he uses to fight the elves, he relies very heavily on like coming up from underneath them and like opening up the ground beneath cavalry forces so they all fall in, their horses' legs shatter.
Brock Stonefist.
Yeah, Brock Stonefist, and he has a rival among the elves who's also the biggest war criminal of the elves,
Lord Salindor.
Yeah, and these two fucking hate each other. And they do worse and worse and worse atrocities to try and get a one-up on one another.
Well, they did eventually get a mutual respect, but yeah, they're
eventually, yes, but only in time to kill one another.
Right at the siege of Athel Mariah is when they die.
Yeah, so those two have this big escalating horror conflict that leads to them getting in a duel where as like the city is burning and fires are consuming everyone, and both forces realize this has gone too far. Like these two are so hell-bent on taking one another down because they realize what a threat the other is, that all of their armies and their advisors are like, we have to fall back, and they're like, nah, he's still alive. I can't leave. I gotta take this guy down.
Both of these guys were considered the tactical geniuses of their side. This is like the Rommel versus Patton of the War of the Beard.
Yeah, and the last time both of them are seen is them fighting amongst the flames of the city, and it takes them. That neither of them escape. There's a bunch of like legends and myths and rumors about the fact that their ghosts can still be seen fighting amidst the ruins of the city. But that one was particularly ugly. From there, it basically, there are other things that are happening like on the sides of the war. Like there's a lot of stuff about how there's a rune lord that's trying to awaken the runic guardians, like the great golems of the dwarfs, and how he ultimately fails because the runic lore needed to resurrect them and the magic in the world needed to resurrect them isn't enough. And his attempt to do so ends up petrifying him. Which was a very tragic end to a beloved rune lord. There's also a whole thing about there's a woman elf who is like the closest ally and student of Immeldrick, who's also a dragon rider. is basically running around on jobs that he keeps assigning her, because the entire time the war is going, Immeldrick is obsessively trying to find the ones responsible for the initial attack, the Dark
Malekith.
Elves, Malekith's agents, because he is hoping beyond hope that if they can find proof that it was the Dark Elves who did this, if they can capture them, that maybe by offering them up to the dwarfs, they could bring understanding and bring it into the conflict. And very tragically, after Immeldrick dies, and she loses her, she crashes out hard when Immeldrick dies because she wants to kill Morgrim in revenge. Only after Immeldrick's death does she actually end up finding the clues that she needs to successfully track down these Dark Elves, and she finds them. She finds this group of what's left of them. What's left of this group of Dark Elves and a sorceress who horrifically have actually found a sealed away black dragon that they unleash in the hopes of the sorceress dominating it so that she can ride it to go further her own ambitions. But she's actually killed by the black dragon because she underestimates it. That thing is out of its fucking mind. It is not a healthy black dragon. It is a very tortured, awful representation of the species. And this elf, she ends up killing that dragon to basically, in a way, save the elves and the dwarfs from its rampage. But the whole thing costs her own dragon, which is deeply tragic. And her and one member of this dark elf crew, instead of killing one another, they're called away to a mysterious magical forest somewhere that's calling them home. Because Athel Loren, the time has come for a debt that was made by a very old Everqueen to be paid, where she promised a significant portion of her children to the Forest of Athel Loren in exchange for a boon that Durthu gave her. And the time has come calling. So a lot of elves just kind of on some impulse up and leave the war and vanish.
Do we want to talk about the final battle? We got 40 minutes left.
So. Let's knock out some more super chats, and then we'll get into the grand finale and the ultimate tragedy of it. Yeah, Leandra. Yeah, Leandra is her name. Let's see, where do we leave off here?
Is Leandra Athenal, I think is her last name.
That sounds right. Yeah. How much gold do the Aesir need to repay the Dawi for the grudges? More than they probably have. More than they now. Okay, what is interesting is that technically, by the strictest technicality, one of the biggest things that Gotrek Starbreaker does, the High King, that he did not have to do, but he did it very much on purpose, is after he kills the Phoenix King, he takes it's big spoiler, not a huge spoiler if you know anything about the War of Vengeance, but he takes the Phoenix Crown and he declares that the death of Kalidor and the taking of the Phoenix Crown is recompense, and crosses out all of the grudges from the War of Vengeance. And the reason he specifically does this is because as High King, he technically has the authority to say, all right, this is the grudge debt for everything that has happened. I consider it paid. Therefore, no dwarfs may legally continue to pursue this debt.
It was a way to end what had become a extremely damaging conflict to both sides.
Yeah. So while the dwarfs like to complain about it, by the strictest technicalities, the grudges of the elves has already been repaid. Now, there have been new grudges since then, but all of the ones from the War of Vengeance were repaid with the death of Kalidor II and the taking of the Phoenix Crown, which the elves have petitioned to have returned to them 600 times. And the dwarves take great delight in saying, no.
There are some people believe that crown is cursed. So
very well could be. Ricardo, in defense of War of the Beard's name, we waged war over a bucket. I believe it.
The Australians fought a war over emus.
With emus, and they lost.
with emus and lost that war. Yeah.
Benjamin Fraser, lest we forget, the War of Jenkins' ear was real. Oh yeah, there's lots of goofy wars out there. Ricky Chapman, Ricky Chapman, what do you got for us? We remember helping a group of Dawi recover an anvil of doom that was lost during the War of Vengeance. We found it embedded in a mountain that a Star Dragon had hammered it into with its smith still underneath it.
That's metal as hell.
Awesome.
I love it.
That dwarf's like, I died. There's no better death for a rune lord than dying beneath his beloved anvil. Walking in Tree, are the pantheons getting involved? Would the ancestor gods start hating elves? Would Vols start disrespecting dwarf craftsmanship? Would they fight? So you have to remember the dwarves do not have gods, not in the sense that the elves do. That's not how they exist. The ancestor gods are much more physical entities that do not assist their people through prayer or like miracles or spells or ways that all the other races do. To a dwarf, the concept of a god is very unique and also kind of weird. They're venerable ancestors, but the idea of like the ancestor gods fighting would mean their return, which would be like, oh man, the fucking apocalypse is happening or some shit. So would the ancestor gods now, if you were to go to the glittering realm and wake them up and strike a chat with them and say, hey, what are your thoughts on this? They would probably be extremely upset about everything that went down with the elves. I mean, Grimnir literally met Kalidor Dragon Tamer and they had an exchange of gifts to leave on friendly terms. He would find the betrayal of Kalidor's own descendant, Kalidor's own great something grandchild would have had Grimnir fucking fuming. So yeah, they would have been upset. Now for the elven gods, now obviously the elven gods, you have Andy's whole thing of, are the elven gods really the elven gods or are they just gods? Because if they're just gods, then odds are they probably don't give a fuck, to be honest. They probably some ways they do care, some ways they don't. Times where their temples may have been profaned by dwarven siegers probably would have upset them a bit. But would Vol the god be like, dwarfcraft is heresy, smite? No, I don't think, because that's not really how the elf gods work generally that much either.
They're above such petty conflicts.
Yeah, but you could argue that the elf gods did step in later in the form of Ariel and Orion, of that they do play rather key roles against the dwarfs of the Grey Mountains. Now, they don't show up for the initial conflict. They actually only show up in time for the Winter of Woe, the green skin part, which comes after the dwarfs were defeated.
You're talking about literal demigods with Ariel and Orion.
So I would say there are definitely some among the gods that would not like the dwarfs. I would say Isha and Kurnos would not be very fond of dwarfs. But Vol honestly probably likes dwarfs. I think it could be argued. Zero Time, semi-serious question. Did the other Chaos Gods do anything? If Zinch's people were behind even this, it sort of feels like he's behind everything. So, okay. This is a criticism that I think is very fair and is very easy and fair, again, to level at Games Workshop. Yeah, which is that whenever anything happens, there is somebody at Games Workshop that's going to lean over your shoulder and go, Zinch did it. Every single time. And it gets kind of annoying, to be honest. You see it all over the place. The most famous Warhammer Fantasy roleplay campaign, the Enemy Within, Zinch did it. It's like a lot of the biggest moments of Warhammer Fantasy, Zinch did it. Bellacor's grand punishment, Zinch did it. It's kind of obnoxious. And it's just because he's the easiest to use.
Well, if I may,
go ahead. Russ might actually have some great insight here.
So some of the advice that I was given directly from Games Workshop over the many years that I worked with them on the role-playing game is that the chaos is basically behind it is the greatest enemy and it will always be the greatest enemy. There is guidance that Games Workshop has internally to say that it always comes back to chaos in the end. And I feel like that cultural impact, I mean, I'm talking about the corporate culture here, that corporate cultural impact on the creativity, on the narrative of the games, I feel often leads people to the easiest, fastest solution, which is to say, well, Zinch is a manipulator. Clearly it was Zinch. It's a legit criticism. I agree with Ryan, but I think it has more to do with the company than the creators.
Yeah, I would say it's a company mandate more than anything. And to be fair, not all stories do this. Like if you read like the Orion trilogy, there is a chaos influence, but it's Nurgle. Nurgle is actually one of the big bads in the Orion storyline. Now, because like I will say that like if you were to look at this conflict, I think it could be very well argued that the demon that manipulates Snorri might have been better suited being a corn demon. That would have worked really well, and it would have been something exciting and different to show Korn being more duplicitous and sinister and setting up one of the greatest conflicts the world had ever seen, where blood would flow like rivers and yada yada yada.
You just made this conflict 20% cooler just by doing that.
And it's something you could really easily change for like your own stories and stuff, to just be like, well, it's Korn now. But I very much agree with Ross that I think a lot of the time what you see is that you'll have someone be like, oh, remember, you have to include a chaos thing in the story. And the writer's like, okay, I didn't really want to do that necessarily initially. So if I'm going to include chaos and I want it to interrupt my story at in the minimal way possible, Zinch is probably the easiest way to do that. So like, it's probably just like the easiest route to accomplishing something you need to accomplish in order for your story to fulfill the qualifications to be published. And like fulfill your contract, because you're a contract worker. You gotta do what you're being paid to do. So I agree. Luckily for those of us that are running our own roleplay games or doing our own world building, this is very, very easy to fix by just taking Zinch and replacing him with one of the other three when it makes the most sense. Acting Zebra, why do the Dawi hate the wheel? Hatchet heresy. I get no animals, but helicopters before a car or other vehicles. That's very funny. So, to be clear, the dwarves do have wheeled vehicles. They have mine carts. They have, actually, if you go back to like dwarves in the old world and dwarves back, I think in 4th or 5th edition, they have pony carts. So they have beer carts that are driven by ponies.
Bugman travels in a cart.
Yeah, which is a model you can now use in tabletop, which I love, and I wanted in Total War as a support unit so bad. The beer pony wagon is great.
There's a mod for it.
Yeah, of course there is. There's always a mod. Yeah, there's an alternate form you can build it as too. It can either be a Bugman's beer pony, or it can be I can't remember what the other thing is. I think it's like an ammunition store or something. But the dwarves would use plus most dwarf war machines have wheels, like their cannons and their organ guns, all this stuff have wheels, because that's how they actually like get them to the places they need to be. Now what I think you're actually asking is, why did the dwarves create some bizarre steam powered flying contraption before they invented like a car? And funny enough, I would say the answer to that is you have to think from a dwarf mindset, which is that for most dwarfs, the answer from how I'm going to get to point A to how I'm going to get to point B is I am going to walk. I'm going to walk and walk and walk, and I will never get tired, and I will march endlessly, and I will eventually get there. So the only reason you would invent like a car from a dwarven perspective is because you are trying to get somewhere faster than you could walking, but you have to take the same route. And most dwarfs, rather unfortunately, will look at that and go, well, that's fucking ridiculous. You don't need to get there fast. You get there right, and you march like my ancestor did. It was good enough for him. It's good enough for me. But
also, have you seen roads in the old world?
Yeah, they're terrible. Now, when you're dealing with like flying, now you have a situation where a dwarf says, okay, I want to get to point A to point B fast by flying through the air so that I cannot be attacked by most things. And I'm also I'm able to cross over terrain that is impossible to cross on foot. Therefore, the only way to accomplish this is via a flying vehicle. And the dwarves go, you're fucking insane for wanting to go up in the air, but all right, I guess. And even still, that took thousands of years of concepting and proof before the dwarfs accepted it, and many still don't.
Yeah.
That being said, there are dwarf vehicles. They're not like part of the traditional tabletop army, but there's actually so very fun fact for you. Online, if you look up, I want to say if you look up if you look up Warhammer Dwarf 8th edition Steam Tank or something to that effect, there was a planned miniature for the Warhammer 8th edition army book for the dwarves that didn't end up making it into the book. It wasn't a steam tank, but it was something very similar to a steam tank, where it was this like great dwarven. It was like it would have been like if you played Blood Bowl for the dwarves, it was basically a dwarf death roller.
Yeah.
It was the like serious version of the death roller. So instead of it being a fat dwarf on a lawnmower, it was more like a great tunneling burrowing machine. And if you actually read the 8th edition army book for the dwarfs, there are mentions of this very machine in the timeline section, where it talks about that they created this great burrowing machine that was huge, and it successfully plowed its way, I think, between Karak Kadrin and Karazakarak or Zufbar. It might have been Karak Kadrin and Zufbar. But it basically reopened the underway path by just tunneling through. And there's even a funny note about how it got attacked by like a bunch of orcs the entire way. And in the last leg of its journey, it got swarmed by black orcs. And they had a big crane on it that was designed to like pick up and move large boulders and rocks. And the dwarves just swung it like they were playing a fucking crane game. And it was just smacking black orcs into these like bottomless chasms to either side, which is great. Getting Gleeful. Okay, you say they were unwittingly tracking the Skaven in the first book. When does the first book take place? The Doom of Khazvar is in minus 1780 IC. The War of the Beard starts in minus 1997 IC. So one thing to keep in mind is that the Doom of Khazvar is more of a mythical event, as opposed to this is the event, this definitely happened. Also, I would argue that the Black Library author probably just goofed the dates.
I don't think Skaven actually exists. They're just an urban legend.
Yeah, they're just myths. But it is very, very likely that there were precursors or early forms of Skaven already in existence by the time the Doom of Khazvar goes off. Because in the Doom of Khazvar story, if you actually read the story, there are legions of fully developed Skaven that attack the city of Kavzar by the end of that story, which takes the course over 13 days. And it's a little hard to believe that like the bell starts tolling and a brand new species just manifests, just pops into existence over the course of 13 days and takes over the city and, drags it down in the muck and everything. Could that have happened? Sure. But it very much feels more like a mythological telling of something that probably happened over a much longer period of time that maybe had a cataclysmic finale, like the Skaven's taking of the city of Kavzar was probably a very explosive event that did take place over 13 days. But it is likely that the species of the Skaven already existed in the deep, dark places of the world long before that. Or alternatively, who wrote the War of Vengeance? Was that
I think it was different authors, actually.
Was it really? Let's see. I can see it from here. It was. Oh yeah, you're right. Huh? Isn't that crazy?
I think it was Nick Kime did one book. I don't recall the other
Nick
two.
Kime, Chris Wright, and C.L. Werner.
Yes,
man. I gotta say, I am shocked how well that trilogy turned out, considering every book had a different author. That's impressive. That is genuinely shocking to me. So it could be that. So it would have been C.L. Werner in that case, I believe. Or no, Great Betrayal would have been Nick Kime. So it could be that Nick Kime was just thought Skaven were around earlier than they probably should have been. That happens a lot in Black Library books. We just kind of shrug and move on. Could have just been just a really big rat. Darius Rose. Hi guys, hope Andy is okay. I think he's doing the best that he can considering the circumstances.
Agreed.
Have you guys thought of doing a stream on a Warhammer version of Record of Ragnarok? It's where 13 of the strongest humans fight 13 of the strongest gods for humanity's fate. I've never heard of that, but that sounds very interesting.
It seems pretty weighted against the humans.
Yeah, it does. Oh, it's a Japanese manga. Okay, interesting.
That does sound familiar. I haven't read it.
I'll have to check that out. I will say, based on all evidence we have, the humans would be absolutely fucked. There'd be like the one guy with Gul Maraz that would probably do an okay job. Oh, well, okay. You know what? If we were able to use Chaos Champions, I mean, they'd still be absolutely fucked, but they might at least put up a little bit of a fight, but most of them would get like flicked and just die instantly. So now, granted, if we were to put it into a manga, that might change things because the Japanese will take power scaling and throw that shit out the window so fast. They don't give a damn.
Now imagining Russell Crowe as Sigmar. Flick.
Yeah, exactly. Watchdog, how could the other 4 Chaos Gods manipulate the war together and against one another? If you had wanted to have all 4 powers involved, you could have. It would have been difficult.
Well, technically, Nurgle's involved with the destruction of Lorelorn, where the plague is unleashed.
Yeah. So if you run with the Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 4th Edition version of the storyline, you have Nurgle's up to shenanigans in Lorelorn. Tzeentch, we know, is manipulating the dwarf, so you could very easily replace him with Khorne and have Tzeentch doing other things. Slaanesh, I would very much say, if you were having a Slaaneshi influence, Slaanesh manipulating the pride and arrogance of Kalador II would be very, very easy.
Well, Malekith gets kicking the whole thing off, right? I mean, he's got Slaanesh right next to him, basically. So
yeah, and then you could throw in Tzeentch anywhere without even trying, and he works. So that would probably be the easiest way to do things while also have them, fucking with each other in various ways. I think it's better to have Chaos be very, very, very minor for the War of Vengeance, which it ultimately is. Like it does little pushes, but ultimately is an extremely minor influence because Chaos at this point is very weak. Chaos is incredibly weak during this era.
And the story is just a lot more meaningful if it is the two species that are involved being the main prime movers of all the decisions.
Yeah, they gotta fall on their own spears, the classic way. The Yeti, could the dwarves have ever actually threatened Ulthuan itself? Sorry if asked before. Oh no, this hasn't been asked before. Could the dwarves have threatened Ulthuan? No. Getting to Ulthuan for the dwarves have a single port. They have one port in Barakvar, which got blew up by a giant warpstone bomb, essentially, and was crippled. At this point, I believe they had just developed or were on the path to developing the first ever ironclad. And the dwarfs are not the kings of naval warfare. They had not really developed the tech at this point to travel into the ocean, because traveling the ocean within sight of the shore, the coastal waters, is a very different affair to crossing the ocean over to an island continent against the greatest naval power in the entire world.
I would argue that they could threaten Ulthuan indirectly by interdicting trade, destroying colonies, blowing up, killing the Phoenix King. First of all.
Oh yeah, they could do that.
So indirectly they could threaten Ulthuan. I don't think directly though.
Yeah, they could make things more difficult for Ulthuan, but attacking and taking even the tiniest part of it, I don't think that was feasible at any point. They would have needed significant help. Now, if they had if Malekith, instead of getting the dwarves to fight the elves for him, had instead pretended to be Malekith the Great once more and had gone to the dwarves beseeching them for aid, that could have very much threatened the shores of Ulthuan with Dawi if he had been willing to transport them via Black Ark.
But that would have been an experience for those dwarves. To be
to be fair, Malekith probably looked at his own Black Arks and went, I don't think I can sell that.
Yeah, that would be tough. Which brings us, I think, to the final confrontation, which is the Battle of the Three Towers. Mm-hmm. This is the climax of the War of Vengeance. It's also called the 14th Siege of Toralessi, so now you know where it takes place. This is after nearly 4 centuries of conflict. The War of the Beard lasted 400 years, almost 400 years. And this is when High King Gotrek Starbreaker decides to personally join the field of battle. And he does it alongside Morgrim Elgidoom. So you have the two greatest surviving dwarven heroes of the War of Vengeance fighting together. So what happens is the dwarf throngs finally, after 14 sieges, finally break through the defenses. Their war machines reduce the wall to rubble, and again, this is decades worth of siege too. This is you're talking years and years and years. Anyway, so the dwarves pour into the city. They're slaughtering the defenders. Gotrek, who is on his throne, being carried by his Lorebeards, just like Thorgrim, he finds the Phoenix King, Kalidor II, who is trapped and unable to flee. Do you want to pick it up from here, Ryan?
Yeah, so something that's also worth noting here is that Kalidor II arrived ahead of his main fleet. There was a titanic fleet because Kalidor II, when Imladric dies, his brother dies, he gets pretty upset because while him and his brother didn't see eye to eye on a lot of things, he did love his brother. And so he prepares a giant army, like all of Ulthuan's military force. So instead of him showing up with his own personal token army, he literally empties Ulthuan of its military might and brings everything over. But because it's such a massive army, it comes in stages, and the dwarves happen to be sieging Tor Lessie where he shows up. And what he does is he orders all of his cavalry and a significant part of his army to go land further down the shorelines and then basically ride up behind the dwarfs. So they'll have the dwarfs surrounded and then to kill the dwarfs. That was the plan. The problem was the dwarfs, with the High King leading them, smashed through the defenses of Tor Lessie much quicker than Kalidor II expected. Bless you, Russ.
Thank you.
And as he comes through, like Ross said, we get. Oh, and one other thing to note is that there is, of course, one final big tragedy here, which is that leading up to the 14th siege, there ends up being a parlay between the dwarves and the elves, where the elf we were Valera that we were talking about earlier,
Leandra,
thank you. Leandra has found her evidence and proof that it was the Dark Elves who started this conflict. She finally did it. And she meets with Morgrim, basically in a tent between the two armies, to say, it wasn't us, it was the Dark Elves, it was Malekith, and she explains everything. And Morgrim is like, God fucking damn it, why could y'all not have explained this earlier? The whole concept, the idea that Malekith the Great is now Malekith the Betrayer, and that all this shit has gone down, all this stuff is very difficult for me to believe, but she ends up having a decent amount of evidence. And the biggest thing that happens is that the Tzeentch demon at this point reveals itself. Because the Tzeentch demon worries that these two are going to prevent the final battle by coming to terms. And it reveals itself, and we get this really awesome moment where the poor ambassador who had his beard shaved and ended up becoming a slayer, Rorik, I think it was.
Grimbach, yeah.
Grimbach.
Forik Grimbach, yeah.
So Forik Grimbach, who has become a slayer at this point, fights this demon and he kills it in a genuinely insane little fight in this tent where they're fighting a really nasty power that none of them were expecting to see very suddenly. And when he kills it, he is dubbed the very first demon slayer. He's the first to be given that particular accolade. And this is where the dwarfs and the elves finally realize they've been played. But Morgrim basically says something to the effect of, it's too late. All of this information, everything that has happened, I believe you. I believe that there are dark elves. I believe they exist. I believe Malekith betrayed your people. I believe you about the Civil War. I believe you that the dark elves orchestrated this, and that this demon was manipulating us. I understand, but it's too late.
Yeah, to clarify, I did check my numbers. 368 years after this is 368 years after the death of Snorri, and Toralessi had been laid siege for 215 years. That's a long goddamn siege.
Yeah, and Toralessi would a wall would go down, and then the elves would push out, and they'd rebuild it, and then this other thing would happen, and they'd rebuild that, and then they'd do this, and it was a lot of back and forth for centuries. So anyway, so keep in mind that the forces that were trying to end the war peacefully, this is the point where they finally give up. Truly, deeply give up. It might have been Rundin. I wanna say it was Forbeck, but it might have been Rundin. But anyway, so the siege happens, Gotrek gets into the city, and like he said, Kalador gets surrounded, and Kalador knows that reinforcements are coming. Kalador II knows that if he can hold the dwarfs long enough, that his reinforcements will arrive, the strategy will be executed, and the dwarfs will be massacred, and he will have killed the High King, and he thinks this will break the spirit of the dwarfs. So he ends up, but it goes much worse for him than he anticipated, and he ends up getting into a duel against Gotrek Starbreaker. And Gotrek Starbreaker, if I recall correctly, actually gets off the throne of power to fight him, or I think he might get off it at the end. I can't remember. He might be on it at the beginning and then gets off later, but it doesn't matter. They have a ridiculous duel, an absolutely ridiculous tier duel, where it is one of the greatest displays of warrior that either side has ever seen. Because Gotrek Starbreaker is a veteran of the Chaos Wars. This is a guy who has fought greater demons and demon princes and beastmen, beast lords, and all sorts of other horrors.
And the Dawi rune stuff was at the height of its power at this point too.
Yeah.
So his rune axes, his rune armor, they were legendary in strength.
Yep. And he's wielding the goddamn Axe of Grimnir itself.
Yes.
And they have this big old nasty fight, and ultimately Gotrek defeats Kalador. I believe he shatters his sword at a part of the fight, and that's when Kalador realizes he's lost
and begs for mercy.
Yeah, and in a very embarrassing moment for the elves, literally begs, weeping, crying for mercy. Which actually, the thing that's interesting about it is it puts Gotrek into a really weird position, because Gotrek never expected Kalador to beg for mercy. Because everything he knew about Kalador was how arrogant and cruel he was, and very few, if any, of the other great elven heroes of the war, or villains, depending on your perspective, begged for mercy. Imladric did not beg for mercy. Saliandor did not beg for mercy. All of these great champions of the elves, not a one of them begged for mercy. But Kalador II, as he's literally floundering in the fountain that he's been knocked into during the fighting, is begging for mercy, asking that Gotrek spare him anything but his life, anything of his life. And Gotrek is kind of, in a way, moved by how pathetic Kalador II is. And embarrassed. He's embarrassed for Kalador. And ultimately comes to the decision that it can't be done. It can't be done. And he decapitates Kalador II.
Well, the grudge was written in such a way that only the death of Kalador would satisfy it.
Yeah. Yeah, because I think Kalador literally offers him all of the wealth of Ulthuan and a bunch of other crazy shit.
Go ahead.
He literally offers him every conceivable wereguild.
This is where I think Gotrek Starbreaker really earns his title as High King, because he could have made this about himself and his son, but instead it's really about ending the war. Yes, he gets vengeance on his son's killer, but what he really gets is he gets an end to the death and an end to the violence, and that's why he chooses, in my opinion, that's why he chooses to do.
I agree. Yeah, I very much agree. He saw this is the only way it could end. And when he kills Kalador, there's a really fucking cool scene in the book where when he kills Kalador, he takes the Phoenix crown and he stands up on the throne of power and he bellows so loudly for everyone to stop. And his voice commands so much authority and so much power from the throne of power that every single elf and every single dwarf fighting in the Siege of Toralessi stops. Everybody stops.
Oh,
and
I should point out this duel lasted 3 full days.
Yeah, it was not a short affair. Like you said, Calidor II was a monster at fighting. Like, he was genuinely very scary. And he held Gotrek back for a long time. But when Gotrek holds up the crown, he declares out to everyone, I've won the duel. The Phoenix King is dead. The fighting, this crown and the death of the Phoenix King, all grudges that have been accumulated by the elves, is as of this moment struck out. So I declare as High King. All elves, you are free to go. You must leave. You must leave the shores of our land. You must leave the shores of the continent, never to return. Your lives will be spared. So put down your weapons, and for my people, do not harm a single one of them. They are free to go. And it was this long, awkward moment that it's the final sighs, the final breath of the War of Vengeance, that everyone listens to him. And the elves put away their weapons, and the dwarfs genuinely help them leave. Like, they help with their wounded. They help with anything they need to do to make sure they've got all their boats and load up their supplies, and they leave. And this is also the moment where Caradryan proves himself. Caradryan, who was a notable advisor to Calidor II, and was also in many ways he was a friend of Imladric, and he was kind of an ambassador between the dwarves and the elves. Caradryan was he was a politician. He did not want anything to do with this war shit. He just liked being on the sidelines of everything. He very much steps into a leadership role here because he's with the big elven army that's coming down on Toralessi. And all of the High Elf fleet shows up just as this is all going down, and they see the dwarfs. They see the High King. And word gets to him, the Phoenix King is dead. And all of the high elves from Ulthuan, so these are the true Ulthuani elves. We're talking Dragon Princes, White Lion, Phoenix Guard, chariots, cavalry, whole
handmaidens.
Yes, the whole legion of Ulthuan is here. They're mad. They're rested. They're ready to fight. And Caradryan gets word that the Phoenix King is dead, and the elves say, let's fucking get him. We could get him. We could get him right now. Let's go to shore. We could kill the High King. We can do this. And Caradryan, who also receives word, because he's like, no. And he receives word very quickly that Malekith has launched an assault on Ulthuan. The Dark Elves, they're literally at this moment, they are already in northern Ulthuan attacking. They've already captured Toran Lek.
While the armies are gone, Malekith struck. And
he is left in a position of we could alpha strike right now, and we could kill the High King. We could reclaim the Phoenix Crown. We could kill Gotrek Starbreaker, and then we could go back and deal with Malekith. But he makes the genuinely very wise decision to say, it's just a crown. At the end of the day, although it's the crown that Anarion the Defender himself worn, because it's even brought up to him, elves are like, he has the crown. We have to get the crown back. He's like, I'll make a new one.
Yeah.
And he orders the elf fleet to turn around and go home.
That's wisdom.
Because to be frank, if they had landed, it would have been, whether or not Gotrek would have died is a complete toss-up, because the dwarf army was terrifying. But there was enough of a force where it would have been a toss-up, which means the casualties both sides would have taken would have been incomprehensible. And that's absolutely true, Nathaniel. There's a quote in the army books where Caradryan say he'd rather lose a crown than lose the realm. Yeah, and so he goes back, and that
Was the
is
war
the end of
event?
the war.
Thanks, Rhino. You definitely know your stuff. I was glad to kind of just sit here and listen to you as you were going over all the elements of this thing. But this is definitely one of my favorite bits of lore, and it's just been a super pleasure to sit here and be a part of it.
Yeah, well, I'm super thankful to have you aboard as well. Of it's nice when having someone that like can remember all like the nitty gritty details that keep fucking fluttering away on the train tracks. And I agree a lot with you, Russ. I wish, for me personally, I really wish that so many more moments in Warhammer Fantasy got the level of detail and examination that the War of Vengeance got. And in such a respectful fashion too. Like, you know, not to throw mud for the sake of it, but like my like as an example, my distaste and dislike for the Nagash trilogy is well stated, because that book did not pay any respect to the source material and just sort of made a bunch of weird shit up that I despised. Whereas this trilogy really feels like it did such a good job of taking what was already there and evolving it into what it feels like it always was. Like it tells us all the details, but in a way that I feel like does such a good job of going, well, of course that's what it was. Of course that's what the details would say, because that just makes sense.
Well, we are at the end of our time for this episode.
Oh,
so...
yes, we are. But we got a couple of more super chats we have to knock out real fast.
All right, let's do it.
I think, luckily it's just this one. So WPKM asks, did dwarves ever deliberately target elven waystones? Yes, but not in the sense that they knew what they were doing, but in the sense that they saw elven architecture that was core and at the heart of many of these elven cities, and they said, level that shit. Which did, contribute rather heavily to the corruption of the old world. Rather unfortunately.
I have one final question for you, Ryan.
Yeah.
What happened to the beard? It was
the beard.
It was said it was shaven. And then...
Yeah, there's an answer for this actually. There's an answer for this. The High Elves have a magic item called the Cloak of Beards. And it's literally this big elf, like elves are like, 6'8" plus. It's this long cloak made out of a bunch of dwarven beards that has a bunch of notable dwarf beards that were forcefully shaven off of dwarves and fashioned into a cloak for elves to wear. And it has the first beard on it.
So yeah.
And that item is fucked up. That is like the most fucked up thing the High Elves have as a weapon or as a piece of armor.
Would you like this enchanted item that's also a war crime?
Yeah, if I recall correctly, it literally not only does the wearer get hatred from all dwarfs, so you get perma-hated by all dwarfs, but if I recall correctly, the effect that it gives is that it disables all runic items in base contact. Which is wild. That's a wild power that has a lot of bizarre lore implications that it's a cool item, but it's a super fucked up item. Like it's very dark elfy. Like if I were to go to you and say, which of the three elves do you think has an item that is made out of scalped beard? Most people would be like, oh, dark elves, obviously. It's like, nah. It's the ones that say they're the good guys.
So this is, I mean, it's important to remember all dark elves were once high elves.
Yeah. They're all elves at the end of the day. But I think that pretty much wraps us up. Ross, do you have any closing thoughts kind of about the War of Vengeance and I'd really like to hear any thoughts you have about like in particular when it comes to closing thoughts about like your thoughts on how this stands compared to like maybe the grand scale of all of the Warhammer lore we have, like where the War of Vengeance kind of ends up, because we have a lot of different wars, but not as a lot of them I think carry the particular weight of like an a multi-species fate of the world level tragedy that this one does.
It feels very Tolkien-esque. And it feels very mythic. It's the age of legend. You are seeing the greatest heroes with the greatest magic, with the greatest dragons. This is it's never been as it's the time and place where you have the toy box and you're playing with all of the toys. You know, with some exceptions, I guess, of technological advancements on the dwarf side. But they have the dwarves have their greatest runes. The elves have their greatest warriors. It's kind of like the Siege of Troy. You know, it's where all the heroes get to shine and have their moments and do big, impressive, amazing things, and sometimes really dark and tragic things. And brother kills brother, and elf, friend kills friend, and you're like, it feels weighty. It feels like it's meaningful in a way that a lot of other battles, or I should say wars, don't.
Yeah, I've always kind of felt that obviously it doesn't have near the level of examination or buildup, but I feel like in many ways the War of Vengeance is probably the closest thing that Warhammer Fantasy has to the Horus Heresy. And like the emotional weight and like the level of like betrayals and all this other stuff that goes down.
I agree. If the elves or the dwarves were the main lens that you saw fantasy through, this would be that. It would be that.
All right, but that is going to be it for us today. Thank you all so much. Thank you, Gideon, for the last little thing of seeing stuff like this, which is why he's always one of my favorite Phoenix Kings. I'm still mildly sad about his low position on the tier list and the barrage of insults. And Caradriel, yeah,
Caradriel.
Yeah, Caradriel, Andy did not give him a super high rate because Caradriel, he wasn't the best Phoenix King. He did his best, but he inherited a lot of problems.
I will insult the hell out of Calidor II, though.
Calidor II, everybody fucking hates Calidor II.
How the hell did he get through the damn flame? He was the most unfit ruler they've ever had.
Well, yeah, remember, he doesn't actually pass through it legit. All those elven wizards give him all those barriers to shield him. The only Phoenix King, the only two, if you want to get technical, the only Phoenix Kings that ever truly passed through the flame were Anarion and Malekith. No one else.
Malekith remembers.
Yeah, Malekith had to do it twice. He fucked it up the first time. But in any event, that's going to be it for us today. Thank you all so much for joining us. Like I said earlier, I will be back here probably in about, I need to let my voice rest a little bit. So let's say 2 hours to give me time to eat dinner and rest and all that for just a bit. And I won't be here, but I'll be over on the Loremaster of Sotek channel to play some AOS against Hawk Oddly, one of our big king mod, which is a lovely time because Hawk, especially recently, if Lorebeards is only functioning as it is because of Hawk, to make that very clear.
Thank you, Hawk.
Everything that's been going on amidst all this tragedy and stuff, which is heartbreaking. We were a bit up a creek until Hawk decided to step in. But Ross will be back tomorrow. What are you doing tomorrow, Ross?
We're doing a tier list of Chaos Warbands in the grim darkness of the far future.
Oh, that's very exciting. So if you want to be talking some Chaos Warbands, and of course, everybody loves a good tier list. So if you want to step into a tier list about Chaos Warbands, make sure to be back here on the Lorebeards channel. Same start time tomorrow with Ross and Alexis. Should be a good time.
Cheers, guys.
Yep. Thanks all for watching. We'll see y'all next time. Bye-bye. Bye. Click the